Hey, what's up? It's Cute Watif. This side. Today we will be seeing what if Deku was saved by Aizawa. Now, before we move ahead with the FIC, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for future Watifs like this. Midoriya had never had the best luck with teachers. Being quirkless, even if his grades throughout school were phenomenal, set a certain bias towards him that affected the vast majority of his teachers and peers, of course his peers. He would be ignored, and if not, then he'd be reprimanded for eliciting violence towards himself somehow. Apparently that was a thing, getting blown up and beat up and messed up in every sort of way by people he once considered his friends was, according to his teachers, principal, and so on, very clearly his fault. His dreams would be very nearly shattered every time he'd have meetings to discuss his future. Obviously a quirkless kid, something that was considered a rarity even in the general public. Going to a hero school was unheard of. He'd absorb what they were saying, disregarding it afterwards. Overall, it didn't leave very high expectations when he went to UA, especially when, on the first day of classes, before he even knew his teacher's name, he was once again having his potential ripped out from under his feet. Mr. Aizawa wasn't a bad guy, obviously. If he was, he wouldn't be a pro hero, much less a teacher for teenagers, and he's shown his compassion on numerous occasions. USJ, the training camp, the Shy Hasaikai raid, etc. Probably too many to count. He's just, if Midoriya were to describe him, abrasive, someone with walls built up. He was similar to All Might in that way. They were just hiding different things behind their metaphorical walls. And like All Might, who has only had to let slip his secrets to very few individuals, Midoriya included, it wouldn't be surprising if there were a select number of people Mr. Aizawa let his walls down around, too. He seemed to be close to present mice-ish, probably more so than could be observed on a surface level. Good friends, maybe more. And Eri seemed to bring out a softness to him. Same with Shinso. Midoriya figured that Mr. Aizawa was just a concealed type of person. He didn't really expect to ever see him lose his calm demeanor, and he definitely didn't expect himself to be the source of him losing it. Asterisk, asterisk, the first thing he notices is how numb his body is. Sensations touch him. Things are surrounding him, but they're only pressures. Not so much distinct feelings. It's strange, unnerving. Everything is sluggish, all of his thoughts. That, coupled with a numbness, leaves him feeling like he's floating, not in touch with reality. The second thing he notices is how cold he is. Since he's numb, it's not so much cold surrounding him, more like cold within him, like he can be snapped in half at a moment's notice. Everything begins coming to his attention, the thrumming in his ears and the pain in his head. There's burning, like they're touching hot coals, along his fingers and toes and face. There's something surrounding him on all sides, a pressure against his cheek, and another one running up and down the length of his spine at a quick pace. It leaves a burning trail where it touches as well, and Izuku can't help the weak croak that escapes him at the discomfort the sensation brings. The pressure stops moving immediately, staying still in a single spot on his back. Izuku would sigh in relief if his body was able to do so, but he fails at even that. His throat doesn't work at all really, serving only to let him seek in breath after shaky breath. It echoes nonetheless, as though there was metal surrounding his face. There's a murmur around him. Low! The fluctuations that come with it imply speech. Like when his mom used to speak on the phone with his dad, trying to keep her voice down so Izuku didn't hear her aggravated remarks even through the wall. It's quiet, too. Something that doesn't much matter, since he can't understand them anyways, but something he's also grateful for the sake of his now pounding head. The pressure on his back moves up, drifting to his shoulder. When it presses down even slightly, Izuku feels a muscle-deep tenderness there, something unfortunately familiar to him. Had he broken his arm? Again, how? How bad was it? The last thing he remembers. Izuku is shifted backwards by something, although he's inclined to say someone now, taking all these sensations into consideration, who is a completely different story. The pressure on his cheek, apparently the only support that his head has had, leaves, and suddenly his head is lolling backwards. The last thing he remembers was snow, no, ice, shattering and splintering under his feet, and a towering someone, a villain. Water flooding his lungs. A villain! Fingers brush against his cheek. Izuku's eyes snap open, a wretched gasp exploding from his apparently ravaged throat. He sees nothing, just blurred, colorless blobs of nothing significant, white spots dancing in his vision, while darkness threatens to overtake it completely. The arms surrounding him tighten. The hand on his shoulder shifts away, wrapping around his torso in a locked grip instead, probably knowing that Izuku can't move that arm, incorrectly believing that he can move really anything. Or maybe it's to not damage the limb further. But that's a strange consideration from whoever this is, a possible enemy. Izuku still hasn't ruled that out. Midoriya. Sudden shouting. It makes his head twinge viciously. There are two hands on his face, very suddenly. He can tell they're hands because of the way their fingers are splayed against his cheeks, the farthest reaching being pressed into his hairline. The thumbs wrap under his jaw, forcing his head forward and preventing him from thrashing away. It effectively stops all the thrashing, though Izuku wasn't quite aware he was trying to get away in the first place until then, from continuing. In the stillness of the next moment, breaths heaving from his chest and tremors running viciously down his now very much cold body, his vision clears somewhat. Though still blurred, Izuku can at least see colors and vague shapes, and the first color he sees is a vibrant gold, flayed outward and framing what appears to be a face. Can ear me, my. Izuku squints, as though that'll make the face mere inches from him clear, as though it will answer so many questions in his fogged and very confused mind. Blue clothing, blue eyes, a kind yet weak and wobbling smile. My boy! Izuku exhales sharply, suddenly breathless. All might. It crashes into him very suddenly. The relief, the understanding. It's amazing how, even in his depowered form, All Might can bring about all semblances of peace in Izuku's fogged mind. All the energy he had somehow scrounged up drains from him, and he finds himself falling even more limply into the arms surrounding him. Other arms. There are now for hands touching him, and the two Izuku can feel burning paths along his freezing skin definitely don't belong to All Might. Izuku tries to turn his face to the form he's pressed against to his left. All Might seems to understand, loosening his hold and supporting Izuku's head instead of restraining it. Izuku's vision swims when he turns, the lines of the forms in front of him blending together in a cacophony of sights. It takes a moment, probably long enough for whoever is holding him to begin feeling impatient. But when his vision clears, all he's met with is a neutral gaze, eyebrows quirked in concern, dark hair tangled and messier than usual framing a paler than usual face. Firelight flickers across his features, though Izuku doesn't know where the source of that is at as of right now. A blanket is strewn across his teacher's shoulders, and Izuku notes somewhere at the back of his mind that it is trailing down towards himself, too, wrapped around his body and the arms that are around him. Izuku's eyes close on their own, a painful croak leaving his throat that just barely manages to sound like the "hi" he was attempting at murmuring to the two individuals surrounding him. It seems to get the message across. The hand that had wrapped around his torso returns to Izuku's back, continuing the attempt at getting warmth through friction back into Izuku. He faintly hears a murmured answer, and notices how All Might's hands almost hesitantly recede after a small pat to his cheek. Izuku doesn't remember everything about what got him here. He remembers a villain, and he remembers snow and ice and being slung over someone's shoulders at some point. He definitely remembers feeling cold, with unconsciousness coming back with a vengeance. All the sensations and sounds that took so long to come to attention to fading away once more. Izuku finds himself being okay with not understanding what is going on. At least for the moment, he feels warm, knowing All Might and Mr. Aizawa were there. Every now and again, Shoyuta finds himself thinking back on his class training camp incident. It seems distant now, more than 2/3 of the way done with the year. They've faced other challenges since then. So has he. Yet, at the weirdest of times, he gets taken back to when he was charging through the forest, dragging his students back to the waiting ambulances, directing those who could walk to help those who couldn't. The students of Class 1B falling into line under Shura's direction without even hesitating because their fear of the situation was just that great. Finally running into the clearing that Bakugo had been taken from them in. Hearing the blood-curdling scream of one problem child, head bowed and arms bound in makeshift bandages. The images flash into his mind 1 second, and are gone the next. Not even a flinch or blink to suggest he had even been reminded of such times. It's irrational, he knows, and that fact alone is enough to drive him nuts. He knows that incident doesn't matter anymore. He knows that his students are strong and resilient, and while they might think back on that time, too, they probably see it as a motivator more than anything, something to push them closer to success. Shoyuta only sees the incident as a wholehearted failure on his part. The helplessness he felt, not knowing where his students were, running through the trees, finding Midoriya and really feeling the gravity of the situation shift into place upon noticing his condition, informing his students, despite the rules put into place, to fight for their lives because he knew he couldn't save them all by himself. That helplessness, the bitter kind that coils in your chest and continues to push the air from your lungs, feels sort of like the type he feels now, actually, charging through drifts of snow that go up to his knees, breaths puffing in front of him as he practically shouts into his phone. I'm on my way to their location. To Shoyuta. Hizashi's voice is strained. He's obviously running towards a commotion, but it only serves to send Shura's nerves further on edge because at least Hizashi is close to his students. Aizawa's on the opposite side of the F mountain. They'll be fine. They're capable of holding out until we get there. And they've got each other. Shoyuta grunts breathlessly, nearly tripping on a block of ice before continuing. It seemed that every time they left campus, something like this had to happen. USJ, training camp, their internships and work studies. If it was up to Shoyuta, they wouldn't have taken this DMN trip in the first place. USJ, while having been home to one of their joyous outing adventures, is at least equipped with safety precautions. But this was a getaway, a chance to test his students' rescue abilities in the field, and not in a simulation of sorts. It had actually been Ajui's idea, strangely enough. She had said something about wanting to work at getting rid of her weakness to the cold. Midoriya had chimed in about the training facility on Mount Hataka, 3 fortified buildings surrounding the fenced-in area of the facility. The area was built for this exact thing, although not usually for UA. Other, closer hero schools. He had immediately wanted to shoot it down, but the rest of the class had readily agreed to check it out, and Shoyuta found himself weak under their excitement, all things considered. So when he spoke to Nedzu, he got the permission slips ready and the security prepared for the trip. And 2 other teachers, Present Mike and All Might, a pair he definitely hadn't been looking forward to being stuck in a freezing, isolated facility with for the better part of a week. Now, he couldn't be more grateful they had come, even if one isn't powered any longer. Just as the thought crosses his mind, a weaponized scream through the speaker by his ear startles him enough to almost drop his phone. The line cuts out right after, and Shoyuta feels dread at no longer being in contact with Hizashi, and yet also feels infinitely grateful that he made it to his students. He continues through the trees, snow billowing in front of him, and the few trees around him swaying back and forth. It's perfect for cold weather rescue training, and it had been going perfectly, too, until he got an alert ping on his phone about a perimeter breach and several dozen messages from students, security members, and his fellow teachers alike. He only was able to read a handful of them. Ashido's texts were practically illegible, probably typed in an uncaring hurry while they were being attacked. Something about their location being near the building Present Mike was in. Ida's were much easier to decipher, an error here and there which, due to the perfectionist nature of a student, made it abundantly clear that the situation was more serious than Shoyuta had hoped. His message had detailed the attacker's appearance somewhat, as well as who Ida had been with at the time of the attack. Ashido, Bakugo, Shoji, Midoriya, and Hagakure. He had read one from a security guard, detailing the area of the breach as well as explaining that they had contacted authorities just in case and were investigating. All useless information considering there was no need to investigate. There was only a need to act. He had gotten a message from All Might just before Hizashi had called him. The man was holed up in his own building closer to the base of the mountain. Each of them were stationed at one of the 3 buildings alone, camera monitors available in each to keep an eye on their students for grading purposes. The breach had been near his building, and Shoyuta was thankful the breacher hadn't thought to attack there. All Might was incapable of helping at all in this situation, much less defend himself against someone who was able to break through the facility's shields should they choose to act violently. All Might's message had explained his theory on the quirk of the breacher, since the shields around the facility were not only strengthened by one of the facility's original security personnel's quirks, being a force field of sorts, allowing weather to flow through but nothing much else, but there were also electric fences set up alongside them. High voltage. Enough to kill practically anyone, strong quirk or not. And from the footage All Might's building's cameras picked up when the breacher passed, the man was very clearly alive, completely unharmed, according to him. So, the only real answer would be that the breacher had a shield quirk of some sort, to protect himself against the electrical currents and the force field alike. As per All Might's theory, and yet something else felt fishy here. Considering the force field was meant to be impenetrable, Shoyuta pushed the thought aside as soon as he heard the familiar voice ahead of him. It was carried to him by the wind. But only a moment more of trudging through the snow did he finally catch sight of Hizashi's golden hair through the snowfall. He looked tousled, snow catching on the black of his hero costume, and his hair lacking its stiffness, pieces falling loose and blowing in the wind. He seemed to be favoring his right leg. Concern began blooming in Shura's chest. Mike! Listen, man. Hizashi starts. Breaths huffing harshly and misting into the air between them. I messed up my knee pretty badly. I'm gonna lead these kids back to the closest base, but you need to go after that guy ASAP. Shoyuta glances behind Hizashi, taking note of his students and their conditions. Similar to Hizashi, they seemed worse for wear, but nothing too drastic. Their hair messy and a bruise here or there. Hagakure's form was easier to see due to the snow accumulating on her, and Shoyuta took note of how Ida's exhaust pipes were steaming, the heat of his quirk making contact with the cold of the air around them. Bakugo was kneeled on the ground, a thin stream of BLD falling into his eyes from a wound in his hairline, probably a concussion. Ajui, likewise, was huddled close to Shoji, the latter using his arms to shield her from the torrential wind and snow. Whatever the reason of Hizashi wanting Shoyuta to follow the villain so desperately, it was very obvious that he was spot on with the need to get their students back to base. Shoyuta cursed to himself. Looking back to Hizashi, do you know where he was headed? What he wanted? His quirk. Hizashi shook his head, stepping back and snagging Bakuga's arm, lifting him to his feet. No, I was just focused on getting him away from the little listeners. But none of their or my attacks seem to have done any damage. Bakuga sways on his feet, glaring at a particular spot past Aizawa's shoulder, clearly lost in thought. The pit of concern in Shura's chest deepens ever so slightly. That doesn't matter though, you need to go help Midoriya, Shoyuta. Shoyuta can feel his expression twist into one of anger. Midoriya went after him alone. Hizashi starts, but is quickly cut off by the load he was helping stay up on his feet. The F-nerd lured him away. Bakuga snarls. Just F took off without us like an idiot. He saved me from getting hit by the villain when my engine stalled. Sensei. Ida chimes in, scuffing the ground with his foot. That apparently angered him, and Midoriya was able to lure him away from us before we even knew what was going on. Shura's teeth clench, fists turning to fists at his sides. Which direction? Hizashi drags Bakugo to the side, motioning towards a clear path of footprints leading further into the wooded area of the mountain. Shoyuta immediately takes off in that direction, calling out to Hizashi one last time, contact the security detail and send them in our direction. And try to contact the authorities while you're at it. I'll call you when we're safe. He doesn't hear any responses before the whistling wind becomes the only sound Shoyuta can hear once again. He clomps through the snow, thanking whatever deity that he had chosen to wear extra layers. He hadn't planned on actually being out in the weather, necessarily. Precisely the reason why he, All Might, and Hizashi were each placed in an observation base. The snow was already soaking through his boots and pants, and he felt a raw numbness take over the skin in that area. All of that wasn't the prime area of focus for him, however. The tracks in front of him just kept going on, and Shoyuta was left wondering if he'd reach a point where they ended entirely, but left him empty-handed just the same. Midoriya was going to leave him with an entire head of gray hairs by the time the year was over. The kid had no self-restraint or self-preservation at all, it seems. He'd been working on it since their mission to rescue Eri. The kid had managed to stay out of harm's way for the most part. No more broken bones since before then, either. Shoyuta had been pleased, beyond words, honestly, more than he could ever hope to express. He felt he could finally let his guard down about Midoriya, doing anything knowing that the kid at least understood that you can't just snap your bones every time you get into a semi-difficult situation. He knows that the training camp incident was a completely different circumstance. He doesn't know what the battle Midoriya was a part of was like, but he had seen the opponent he was up against. Knew what the villain's quirk was after the official report was given to UA for inspection for legal purposes. He had seen the kid in the hospital bed, knowing that only one of his broken arms was actually his fault from what the nurses had said in passing. Everything else was damage he'd taken from attacks. Self-defense, Shoyuta knew, and, arguable more importantly for someone training to be a hero, defense of someone else. Midoriya just definitely needed to consider his priorities between the two types of defense more closely, as well as what those types of defense can include other than fighting back. But then this stunt. It doesn't matter if it was an opportunity he was given, since the villain apparently had his sights locked on Midoriya near the end of the scuffle. And it doesn't matter if Midoriya had his reasons for making the choice he did. Hizashi wasn't a pushover. The two of them had been in plenty of tight fights together, and Hizashi was capable, even against a villain apparently as tough as this guy. He could have held out until Shoyuta got there. He would place his bet on that fact any day. But then Midoriya hadn't taken that into consideration, obviously. He had been concerned about Ida, saving him entirely from an attack by the villain. He had probably been concerned about Bakuga's obvious concussion and Ajui's cold temperature endurance, and how much longer Shoji and Hagakure would be able to hold up with two members of their group already weakened. Hell, the kid probably felt concern for Mike, too, especially once Hizashi's attacks apparently failed, and he got knocked around a bit. Shoyuta was willing to place his money on that Midoriya hadn't once considered how he was going to get out of the situation. Well, probably was doing that now, being alone with a child-hunting maniac in the middle of a snowstorm on a mountain. They were headed down the mountain. It was obvious when Shoyuta considered the small observations he'd picked up since leaving his base. The wind direction was blowing towards him now, whereas running eastwards where he had been told the attack was at, it had been blowing at his right side. They were headed south, towards the base of the mountain, back towards where All Might had spotted the villain on the security cameras. That could work in their favor if there were security personnel there already investigating the incident. Something shakes beneath his feet, a rumbling like an earthquake that only lasts 2 seconds tops. An impact! Midoriya! Damn it! If at all possible, Shoyuta pushes himself to run even faster. The conditions don't work in his favor in the slightest. He can barely manage to keep his eyes open as the wind billows against him. Not good, but he manages it. Slowly, as he continues to follow the trail, he begins hearing the sounds of a battle. Shouts, angry screams. Too deep to be from Midoriya. Crashes, sounding like trees being uprooted and shattered. Stop struggling, brat! A loud shout followed by another crash follows the order. And then suddenly a green light is flying by Shoyuta, crashing through a tree to his right and rolling in the snow for several feet. Shoyuta resists the urge to go to his student's side, instead whipping to the left towards where the villain no doubt was. There, standing in a hulking form above Shoyuta, is a villain that All Might had described to him. The villain reels his arm back, and Shoyuta engages his erasure before the guy has an opportunity to use his quirk. Shoyuta lunges backward, avoiding the punch towards him before flinging his capture scarf out and wrapping it around the villain's torso. All Might predicted that the quirk was a shield of some sort, or healing. Either way, restraining him and keeping erasure locked on him would take care of that easily. Except the wind was already making it difficult to see clearly when he was running here. To keep his eyes open long enough for them to get the villain down to the authorities would be impossible, even without his attention being split between his opponent and his student several feet behind him. He blinks. Then he's flying through the air, hitting the cold crowd roughly, the air pushed from his chest as he attempts to gather his senses. What had happened? The guy hadn't moved. That meant it was his quirk, but what was it? Telekinesis. Something like Bakuga's explosions. Shoyuta gasps, only barely realizing that there are red sneakers directly in front of him. 2 hands clasping his shirt and dragging him through the snow. There's another impact by Shuta's feet as the hulking form barrels towards them and ultimately misses. Mr. Aizawa. Shoyuta, despite his spasming diaphragm, manages to grunt, pushing himself up into a kneeling position beside his student. I'm so sorry. Are you okay? Sorry. Shoyuta feels the need to question Midoriya's meaning, but chooses to instead pull Midoriya to him, sprinting away from the villain as quickly as he could manage while dragging Midoriya behind him by the wrist. The villain. Midoriya shouts over the whistling of the wind. I think he's got a type of regeneration quirk, sensei. Shoyuta takes a sharp turn when he notices another sound of an impact directly behind them. He ducks beneath some branches, trying his best to not force Midoriya into the tree and other obstacles. How? He absorbs damage, like Fat Gum's quirk, and heals when he shoots the damage back at his opponent. Midoriya shouts, yanking his hand from Shuta's grasp to more easily keep up with his teacher. All of that damage he's giving out is from the damage I caused him earlier. Right. Midoriya loves studying quirks. Shoyuta has seen him scribbling away at his notebooks numerous times, and has only gotten a vague idea of the type of analysis he does in them. And the kid has successfully identified plenty of less identifiable heroes in the past, including Shoyuta himself. Taking that into account, if the kid is right, then the impact Shoyuta had felt that had been the pain that Midoriya had caused this villain. It had felt like his ribcage was on the verge of shattering, but that left the question of how he had gotten through the forefield. He couldn't heal himself immediately as he was going through, since he relies on giving that pain and injuries to other people. That meant there very well could be someone or multiple people already dead at the barrier. SHD, listen Midoriya, Shoyuta shouts, glancing around them, noting their new environment as they slide to a stop in the snow. Groves of skeletal trees surround them, and the small frozen lake a few hundred feet from them. Barely identifiable under the thick snow as a lake. I can't use erasure as long as usual because of the wind making me blink. As soon as you see my hair go up, lay into the sky, all right. Go for the head. It was the only way to make this fight as short and clean as possible. Knocking the villain unconscious would ensure that he couldn't use Midoriya's extremely strong quirk against them. He figured that Midoriya had already experienced his own strength used against him. Judging by the way he was slightly hunched over, Shoyuta could still feel the zing in his abdomen from the impact. They wouldn't be able to take many more of those. Midoriya, for his part, gives a strong nod. Green lightning shooting off of him, and his stance widening in preparation. Shoyuta can hear the villain coming closer, the snapping of twigs and the crunch of snow. Heavy breathing. He steels himself, bringing his goggles up to protect his eyes from damage. Even if they don't succeed in keeping the wind away, the villain bursts through the treeline, and Shoyuta immediately activates his quirk. The villain doesn't stop charging for them, but Midoriya does as he was told anyway. He bolts away, shooting through the air, and SWNGNG his leg at the villain's head. The sound of the impact could make even the most stoic of individuals cringe. There's a loud crunch as the man's nose breaks and he dead falls to the ground. Midoriya lands a few feet from him, stumbling slightly as his feet catch awkwardly in the snow. He quickly shoots back to stand beside Shoyuta, staring at the villain's fallen form, as if he'll rise and continue the assault. But he doesn't. Shoyuta sighs, releasing erasure and reaching underneath his goggles to massage his dried eyes. He can see Midoriya slump beside him in relief. Green hair thrashing back and forth as the wind continues to blow viciously around them. Red stains his cheeks from wind burn and the cold in general. He has a few rips in the back of his costume, probably from when he got thrown through that tree earlier. No apparent wounds, though, much to Shuta's relief. All right, I'm going to contact the security detail to get this villain apprehended as soon as possible. Then we need to contact Present Mic and All Might to update them on the situation. Shoyuta pauses, noting how Midoriya was doing his damnedest of covering up the tremors running through his frame. His fists were clenched, jaw jerking every few seconds as his teeth threatened to chatter. Shoyuta suddenly finds it more difficult to ignore the numbing burn of his calves and feet. Then we'll get warmed up at base. Midoriya nods, clearly looking forward to the warmth Shoyuta has just promised. Shuta's mouth quirks up ever so slightly. This kid wasn't even aware of the lecture he was going to get later, maybe he was, and he just was so used to it by now that he couldn't effectively show his contempt for the future event. Are the others okay? Shoyuta is dialing up the security detail he had mentioned earlier when Midoriya asks. They're close to the barrier, all things considered, meaning that the security personnel would probably only take 10 or so minutes at most to reach their location. Shoyuta presses the call button, looking down to Midoriya. Yes, they're all right. Present Mic is with them, and they're probably already being tended to by him and your classmates, if not the on-site medics. Though, the medics were likely with security personnel along the border of the training area if it was true that the villain used his quirk against someone already. The likelihood of them having reached Present Mic's outpost was slim. He wouldn't tell Midoriya that, though. Midoriya smiles as the ringing in Shuta's phone starts. Good. That's good. I was worried. Shuta's about to respond when his vision is completely blackout out, cold crashing into his face and stinging his eyes. He stumbles back a pace and immediately takes action before he completely figures out what is happening. It happens a little too fast, actually. By the time Shoyuta realizes that he's just had snow thrown tactfully into his eyes, he's already snagged Midoriya's arm, yanking him out of the way of the onslaught to come. His other hand reaches for his knife at the back of his belt, binding cloth already unraveling simultaneously. He can't see where the villain is, yet he knows that there's an attack coming that he can't stop with his vision completely out of order. He slashes out, feeling the knife embed itself in flesh, right as the capture weapon wraps around what Shoyuta assumes to be the villain's torso. By then it's too late, though. Shoyuta knows this as he is then blasted backwards, a crack echoing inside his head as his own nose is broken. His capture weapon rips as he's thrown backwards, his grasp on Midoriya releasing immediately, and the little bit of vision he has blackens around the edges. He lands with a loud grunt, hands immediately grasping for his face on instinct as his body acts on the need to get Midoriya and get away. He hears Midoriya in the distance. How far does this DMN quirk throw people on impact? Cursing at the villain, and Shoyuta has the sudden fear that the kid is actually trying to fight their opponent head-on again. But the next thing he knows, there's hands grappling with his shoulders, trying to force him into a sitting position, while mumbling what Shoyuta hears as continuous sorcery. Shoyuta prioritizes getting the snow out of his eyes as Midoriya gets him into a standing position, however slumped onto the younger individual it is. He manages to clear his vision enough to see the next attack coming without the means to actually stop it, or even attempt to this time. And Midoriya, with his quirk based off of direct contact more than anything else, doesn't have any more luck than Shoyuta. He could have predicted what came next just the same, though. The hands that were holding him up just a moment ago shove him roughly away, and Shuta's forced to watch as the villain. Shuta's knife previously embedded in his shoulder forces the very same injury onto Midoriya. Shoyuta shouts out as Midoriya goes flying backwards, landing roughly and rolling in the now red-tinted snow. The villain ignores Shoyuta, marching towards Midoriya and Shoyuta finds a second wind at the prospect of this villain attacking a still recovering Midoriya as he lays in bloodied snow. The image itself has Shoyuta flinging out his binding cloth as a villain gets mere feet from Midoriya, wrapping around his limbs and torso. Shoyuta forces his eyes to remain open, ensuring Midoriya's safety for at least a moment. A loud crack fills the air around them, not like the trees that were being ripped through earlier, and not like when the villain's and ultimately Shuta's own nose was broken. This is a deep sound, one that rumbles in Shuta's chest, and it takes him a moment to realize that this crack is the sound of ice buckling under weight. His BLD freezes in his veins, eyes growing wider as he realizes that the distance between him and Midoriya being thrown backwards by the villain's quirk was enough to place his student at the center of the frozen lake. When Shoyuta catches Midoriya's gaze, he can tell that his student understands this as well. Shoyuta shouts, "Despite this, get out of there!" Midoriya stands, red coating the right side of his torso, and Shoyuta is already dismissing the villain in favor of trying to wrap the cloth around Midoriya to drag him to safety. He wins it back, but before he gets the opportunity to shoot it towards his student, the villain lunges. The ice splinters below them, deep cracks webbing around Midoriya's feet as the boy charges up his quirk to escape. He doesn't get the chance to. Midoriya's green and wide eyes glance toward Shoyuta. Shoyuta shoots out his capture weapon desperately. The ice buckles completely. The villain and Midoriya sink below the water. Shuta's entire life has been built on being rational. That's what he bases his patrols on, his outsourcing missions with the police and other heroes, his underground work, even his teaching. There's a reason he's known for his long list of expulsions. In any instance where something has gone wrong, like hypothetically speaking, someone falls into a frozen lake, standing there in shock is 100% not rational. Immediate action is what is rational and what is needed. Even so, as soon as the water stops sloshing at the edges of the newly formed hole in the ice, all Shoyuta can manage to do is stare. It only lasts for a moment, a couple seconds at most, and then his feet are pulling him forward without much of any thought at all. His capture weapon is uncoiled, swirling above his head as he eases his way closer to the hole. The ice creaks under his feet, smaller cracks appearing beneath him. He growls, gaze flashing from his feet to the hole, back again. He feels his heart beating a mile a minute as his mind races to figure out the solution to this situation. How is he going to get close enough to reach in with his binding cloth and snatch Midoriya? He couldn't get closer, the ice already creaking under his weight. More cracks webbing around him made it plenty obvious that he was too heavy. He couldn't jump in after him either, for obvious reasons. He'd do Midoriya no good by being just as catatonic as the kid will surely be once he gets out. He was going to have to race against time to get Midoriya to safety, and he won't be able to do that if he's freezing solid after each step through the snow. Damn it! He hisses through his teeth, shifting his weight from one foot to the other to test his current reach. He wouldn't be able to do much on the ice, wouldn't be able to reach into the water, and even if he was able to do that and locate Midoriya simultaneously without problem, he wouldn't be able to find purchase on the ice. It'd snap beneath his feet under two people's weight. He has to. Something hammers on the ice beneath Shuta's feet, and the underground hero feels the breath catch in his lungs. He quickly brushes the snow away with his foot, crouching low and looking through the ice. It's murky. The ice obscures his view, but he knows for certain that he sees the bare skin of a hand on the other side. Shoyuta takes a step back, feet still very much on the ice. It doesn't matter, he just needs to break through, and then he'll figure out the rest after that. He swings his leg up, has it arch into the air before bringing it down with all of his strength. His foot goes through, more webs of cracks flying out from the impact site. He finds himself thinking back to when Midoriya fell through. The kid had been thrown backward, back impacting roughly with the ice. That must have been the reason for its splintering and ultimately shattering. It was freezing out, but it wasn't cold enough for the lake to be frozen solid all the way through. The ice on top was just strong enough to hold up an individual's weight. But add any unneeded pressure, and it was as good as being fragile glass. His leg is soaked from his mid-calf down to his foot, when he pulls it back onto the surface of the ice. Without another thought, Shoyuta shuffles backward, feeling for the secure sensation of solid ground beneath his feet instead of the ominous give that the ice gave with every step he took. He finds solid ground within moments, not hesitating in shooting his capture weapon into the water. He's had to do this plenty of times in class. It was easy enough to keep an eye out on his students when the water was clear and it was bright out. But this water is murky, and the sky is heavily clouded, and snow is trying its damnedest to blind him with every passing second. The only reason he successfully gets a hold of Midoriya is because of how close to the surface he is. If he had been deeper, shoulda questions if he'd be able to find him at all in these conditions. Shoyuta braces himself and pulls with all his might. The binding cloth grows taut, and before Shoyuta knows it, water is splashing up onto the ice from the force of the body breaking the surface. The relief Shoyuta should be feeling is very quickly squashed by the realization that it wasn't Midoriya he had managed to pull out, but rather the very villain who had put them in this position to begin with. Shoyuta growls with venom, immediately abandoning his assistance with the villain. His hero title be damned, the villain's safety is in no way an imperative in this situation. The BSDRD can drown as far as he's concerned. Any other day, Shoyuta would abide by the basic rules of hero work concerning villains. Apprehend but do not slay. Keep them alive and turn them in. Now, though, if the villain slides back under the ice and is never found by the authorities, Shoyuta would see it as the best possible situation. But no, the villain manages to crawl across the ice, body quivering and quirk obviously trying to fix the damage to his body. Maybe he can't concentrate. Maybe he's too far gone to even think about using Shoyuta. It doesn't matter. Shura's too focused on scanning the ice's surface for any hint of green or skin to even think of the possibility of being used once more to help heal the villain only a few feet away from him. There are no other signs of life. Nothing smacking against the ice from below. No growing cracks. The villain slouches into the snow at the edge of the lake bonelessly. The whistling of the wind is the only sound Shoyuta can hear beside his own heartbeat. No, he whispers. No, 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 no. His only other option now is to slide himself across the ice and pray he doesn't disturb it too much to fall through himself. At this point, though, whether he falls through or gives up, it will have the same outcome for Midoriya. As far as he's concerned, that means his only option is to try. He moves to step back out onto the ice. There's a flash of green electricity beneath the frozen shell of the lake, a muffled boom, and then all of the ice shatters at once, breaking off and into the air in small crystals and large clumps. They all fly feet away from the lake, crashing down into the surrounding trees and snow. Shoyuta has to move to avoid being hit by some of it himself, moving on instinct as his brain tries to catch up with what just happened. He's fairly confident he sees the unconscious villain get buried by a relatively large clump moments later. And then everything stills again, the water sloshing viciously as the ice pieces around them settle against the ground and among the branches of the woods. But this time Shoyuta sees it. Somehow, while recovering from the unexpected shock of the situation and the snow blowing in his eyes, Shoyuta manages to catch the small web of green electricity flashing below the water near the center of the lake. He shoots his binding cloth forward at once, hoping for it to be the last time. The electricity fades long before the binding cloth manages to wade deep enough into the water. Shoyuta is forced to search blind for Midoriya. The cloth wraps around something, and Shoyuta doesn't hesitate in dragging it back up to the surface. It's heavy, but not as heavy as the villain had been. A spark of hope grows within Shoyuta. The water sloshes when his catch breaks through the surface. Green and white, waterlogged cloth and a purple arm is all Shoyuta sees before he's wading through the now ice-free water, yanking at his binding cloth as he nears Midoriya. He's knee-deep in the water by the time he reaches Midoriya's side. His skin burns at the contact, feeling like he's being caught in an inferno. He doesn't focus on the kid's condition when he nears, just grabs him around the chest, soaking his sleeves up to his elbows in the process and pulls him through the water. Midoriya doesn't react. He's boneless in Shoyuta's grasp, head lolling against his chest, arms SWNGNG beside Shura's knees. Shoyuta can't see his face, not yet. He finds himself unsure if he wants to. He's breathing heavily by the time he reaches the literal zone. Midoriya's feet drag against the frozen mud beneath the water as Shoyuta struggles to get him up onto the snowy surface of solid ground. He collapses backwards once he manages it, Midoriya laying halfway on top of him. The kid is soaked completely, obviously. His hair hangs in wet clumps of curling ringlets, hardening immediately as the water freezes upon contact with the air. The same water proceeds to soak through Shura's hero costume even further, dampening his torso. His shivers grow worse. He inhales heavily 3 times before he surges forward onto his knees, letting the kid fall back into the snow. Midoriya, Shoyuta murmurs, hands grasping the kid's shoulders in a vice-like grip. Only when Shoyuta finds himself pausing to wait for a response does he realize that while he's shivering uncontrollably all across his body, Midoriya is ominously still against the snow. His eyes are closed, frost accumulating on his eyelashes. There's a purple tint growing across the pale face, blue touching the kid's parted lips. The red that should be spreading out across the green cloth of his shoulder is clear and stainless, only a faint brown tint to the cloth to even hint at there ever being an injury. "No!" Shoyuta croaks out, his tone more angry than he intended. "You're not doing this to me, kid!" He sits forward, leveraging over the kid's torso. He places his ear against Midoriya's chest, feeling the sting of the freezing cloth against his face. He waits for only a second, feeling dread pooling in his stomach when no heartbeat can be heard. But then he hears it, a faint beat followed by another moments later. Far too slow and, most concernedly, no breathing. His chest is as still as can be. Probably inhaled water. Drowned. "All right, Midoriya," Shoyuta breaths hastily, quickly brushing the soaked and snow-covered hair from both his face and Midoriya's. "You're going to have to breathe for me. Okay." Of course, Shoyuta is only met with silence for a response, but doesn't let that stop him. He threads his fingers together, setting them to the left side Midoriya's sternum, and then he pushes, repeatedly. He tries to ignore the creaking of Midoriya's ribcage as he counts in his head. Shoyuta is used to the macabre. He's an underground hero, so it's more common than one would think when looking at the more grandiose examples of heroics that are shown to the public on a day-to-day basis. The point being, this isn't the first time he's had to do CPR on somebody. It isn't even the first time he's had to do CPR on someone he knows. Heroes deal with the possibility of harm every day, so he's obviously had colleagues get into trouble on his watch. This is different, though. This is a child. One that is his responsibility, one that he has watched grow over the past year. 30, Shoyuta whispers to himself, quickly tipping Midoriya's head back, pinching his nose and clasping his lips around Midoriya's freezing cold ones. He blows, watching Midoriya's chest rise and fall. Blows again, watches his chest, then proceeds back to compressions. The cold bites into the wet patches of his suit, burning along his legs and chest and arms. His nose pulses with every compressions he gives. His hair hangs in thready strings in his eyes, interfering with Shura's view of Midoriya's face lolled up and away from him, mouth still hanging open. He feels the abrupt crack of a rib snapping under his hands. Normal, he has to remind himself, especially if the individual is as skinny as Midoriya, even with the layers of muscles he's been able to pack on throughout the year. 30. Damn it! Shoyuta pulls Midoriya's face back to him and repeats the whole process. Again and again, breathing and giving compressions, the cold biting into him, his own heart beating wildly in his ribcage as he snaps another of the kid's ribs beneath his hand. "Come on, problem child," Shoyuta whispers under his breath as he enters his 4th round of compressions. "Breathe for me. Please. Come on." Shoyuta tilts his head back again, breathing once into Midoriya's slack mouth. But this time, when his chest rises, it also convulses, a choking gurgle being Shura's only warning to move away. He sits up as water rises in Midoriya's throat. The kid's eyes fly open in a panic, pupils as small as needle points. Shoyuta can't help the sudden, maddenly smile that spreads across his face. There you go, kid. Shoyuta shoves an arm under Midoriya's shoulders, flipping him onto his side immediately, just as the water finally manages to escape Midoriya's lungs. The kid hacks and coughs into the snow beneath his face, head hanging limply from his neck as Shoyuta practically holds him up. His arm is wrapped around Midoriya's torso like a seatbelt, able to feel the kid's diaphragm spasm with every desperate gasp and forced cough. He reaches forward and presses against his forehead, leveraging Midoriya's head up instead of forcing the kid to struggle with raising it. There's a GG, and then Midoriya's very suddenly throwing up all the water he had managed to swallow. The smile slips off Aizawa's face even if the relief remains. He awkwardly pats the kid's back, rubbing circles in some form of comfort. He might not be the best at comforting or being gentle, but that doesn't mean he lacks the capability to be either. He is just very particular on what circumstances need it, and what circumstances actually just need tough love. This instance needs the rare, gentle type of treatment. Get it out, Midoriya. Shoyuta murmurs close to the kid's ear. It's all right. You're fine. Midoriya is shaking. Shoyuta realizes, tremors running up and down his entire body now. A far cry from the stillness that had overcome Midoriya mere minutes ago. He struggles to stay in the semi-upright position Shoyuta has him in, as though he's expected to hold up any of his weight at the moment. His right arm, the one still wrapped thickly in Shuta's scarf, hangs uselessly by his side. Eventually Midoriya's convulsions finish, leaving puddles of water and vomit in front of the teen. Shoyuta scrunches his nose, moving the two of them away from the sick. Drooling hangs from Midoriya's mouth, and while it will probably be embarrassing for both of them in the future, Shoyuta grabs a swatch of his capture scarf and wipes the mucus away. They stay like that for several moments. Midoriya doesn't say a thing, laying limply in the position Shoyuta has placed him in against his chest, breathing deeply with his eyes closed. Not asleep, though. Not yet. The quirk to his eyebrow that suggests discomfort is enough of a clue for Shoyuta to know that even though the danger is over, they aren't actually out of the woods yet. He eyes the pile of ice and snow mere feet away from them, the place where the villain had collapsed. He had not drowned. He'd been able to drag himself out of the water, so what happened with Midoriya? They had fallen in together had the villain attacked underwater. They both would have been too shocked by the cold to even consider fighting under the ice. But the villain also had a clean slate once he went under. No injuries to account for. His only focus was trying to get out, hammering against the ice. Midoriya must have still been distracted by the stab wound in his shoulder to focus straight away. Shock was probably in shock. Now, in fact, Shoyuta pulls him closer to himself at the thought. So, by the time Shoyuta had been helping the villain out of the ice mistakenly, Midoriya was probably just then realizing the predicament he was in. He had probably swam up, with difficulty due to his wound, and pounded against the ice. But Shoyuta had been too distracted with his angry thoughts towards the villain to hear them. In his desperation, then Kid used his quirk and... Shoyuta finally looks down to the purple appendage draped in his capture weapon, hanging limply at Midoriya's side. Midoriya had lost control in his desperation, couldn't control his output, and ended up going all out. It broke the ice to pieces and allowed for Shoyuta to get to him, but it also snapped a bone in his arms like twigs. Shoyuta grimaces, shuffling Midoriya back against the snow so he could lay down. He hesitantly grabs a hold of the limb, turning it tenderly. He immediately stops when a small whimper escapes Midoriya's catatonic form. He needs to secure it before they get out of there. And they do need to get out of there. Shuta's shivers are growing worse, but Midoriya's are starting to grow faint. Midoriya, this is going to hurt. Midoriya turns his face slightly, his eyelashes now completely white, and his soaked hair beginning to get covered in frost as well, hardening in wisps against his forehead. He blinks up at Shoyuta, eyes fogged over, but clear enough to confirm he understands somewhat. I'm sorry, kid. Without any hesitation, Shoyuta bends the arm and pushes it to Midoriya's chest. The kid yowls, the scream being carried through the wind when it escapes the teen's ravaged throat. Shoyuta hurries in wrapping his binding cloth around the kid's torso to secure it. But every time he puts pressure on the wrap, a croaking MMM escapes Midoriya's blue lips. He ignores the sounds to the best of his ability, murmuring repeated apologies to at least try to soothe the kid at least a little, knowing that he doesn't have time to cater to Midoriya as much as he should be. He still needs to take care of the stab wound once they get someplace warm, as well as the ribs he broke, and Shoyuta blinks, pausing and tying off the makeshift sling. He reaches forward, clasping the back of Midoriya's neck. Midoriya's eyes blink open at that, glossy and not entirely there, but he at least doesn't fight Shoyuta when the older man pulls him from the ground for only a second, revealing a BLD-soaked patch beneath Midoriya's head. It all snaps into place for Shoyuta, then. The final piece. Why and how Midoriya managed to drown moments after opening his own gateway to freedom. His quirk makes it to where he has to have leverage of some kind, a solid stance, momentum shooting him forward, so he isn't forced backwards when he uses his augmented strength. But underwater, Midoriya wouldn't have anywhere to find leverage against. He'd be forced to be thrown back, and in this case, aiming up at the ice above him would shoot him down to the strong stone and dirt below him, cracking his head against the ground while unable to prevent it. Shoyuta hesitantly runs his fingers through the damp and hardening curly hair, paying close attention to Midoriya's face so he can know if he's touched a tender spot. It doesn't take long. His fingers feel something warm, a notable change, tacky and coating a small patch of Midoriya's hair. He doesn't intrude on the wound too much, knowing he can't do much in the low light, but knowing now that they were also dealing with a head wound was important. They had to get someplace warm and safe. Now, no options. Midoriya, Shoyuta calls, clasping his shoulder while still supporting the back of his head. Are you with me? Midoriya blinks up at him in a daze, but gives a small nod. Why, SOS, and Shoyuta forces his expression to soften at that. Good job, kid. You're doing good. Shoyuta reaches for Midoriya's unwounded arm and pulls it over his shoulder. As much as he hates and needs Midoriya to help him here, he can't have the kid falling to sleep for multiple reasons. Secondary drowning, concussion complications, hypothermia complications. The list could go on. Just the kid needs to stay awake until they reach an outpost. From this area, the closest outpost would be the one All Might is lodged in. That's their destination. Somewhere warm with a first aid kit, and somewhere to defend themselves and contact everyone else. God knows they need the assistance ASAP, and Mike was still waiting for him to call him. The guy was probably freaking out at this point. That's a matter for another time. Get ready, Midoriya, Shoyuta murmurs, standing up and tightening his hold on Midoriya's arm. Up we get! Midoriya obviously stumbles, vertigo hitting him. He practically collapses into Shuta's side, head lolling against Shuta's shoulder, but the underground hero merely pulls him closer, looping an arm around his back. He waits for Midoriya to recover somewhat, and to hit surprise, or not so surprise, Midoriya is the one to take the first step. Shoyuta smiles slightly, pleased to still see the spark of proactivity in his wounded student. They hobble through the snow, swaying back and forth with the wind and snow. All Might's sanction was only about 3 miles away, possibly a bit more. Looking down at Midoriya cuddled up at his side with green eyes far too distant, Shoyuta just hopes they can make it in time. 3 weeks before, why is it, Shoyuta drawls, eyes narrowed, that I wasn't even surprised when I got the call from Recovery Girl that you were here. The curtains of the infirmary are drawn halfway, streaming in the glow of the afternoon sun across the lap of the sole occupant. In the corner, Shoyuta can see a tuxedo blazer folded and hung over the visitor's chair, yellow in color, and most definitely All Might's. It's past his class PRD, so the man is probably visiting the kid since he has nowhere else to go. Them and their little connection, whatever that might be. Midoriya at least has enough decency to look embarrassed, eyes downcast and a faint blush painting his cheeks. There are bandages wrapped around his ankle. His foot sat upon a pillow at the end of the bed. There's a red singe on his right shoulder that has been left exposed to the cooled air of the infirmary. Shoyuta eyes that for only a moment before forcing his gaze away. He sighs, crossing his arms, and leans against the nearest wall. What happened this time? Midoriya's fingers pick at the sheets beneath him. Still avoiding Shuta's gaze. I got distracted. Shoyuta stares wordlessly. He can feel Midoriya grow more nervous as the seconds tick by in silence. Todoroki didn't mean to. I need to talk to him when I get out of here. Midoriya, if at all possible, seems to shrink down more than before. He looked so upset after he accidentally burned me. I've never seen him look at me that way before, like he was going to cry or something. I don't know, it was my plan after all. He was just doing what I told him, but I stepped wrong and got in his path of fire, that's all. Shoyuta grimaces. If that's all, then what were you distracted by? Midoriya jolts, as if electrocuted. His eyes finally glance up to Shoyuta, a confused quirk to his eyebrow. What? You said you were distracted, Shoyuta repeats, drumming his fingers against his upper arm. You are many things, problem child, but someone who loses focus is not one of them. Midoriya looks away again, and Shoyuta has to inhale steadily to prevent himself from snapping at the kid for being nervous for no reason. He understands that he's intimidating her, so he's heard. Hizashi has told him plenty of times of both his students and students from other programs at UA, describing him as such. But seriously, the kid was acting as if Shoyuta was still willing to expel him or something. SHD, you're not in trouble, Midoriya, Shoyuta says quietly, forcing his voice to sound as unperturbed as possible. He isn't quite sure he succeeds, but it's as close as he can get at the moment. I just need to know, for future exercises. It's important. Midoriya nods stiffly. I know. After another moment of silence, Midoriya wrenches his gaze up to meet Shuta's eyes. I saw Azui slip from the wall she was climbing on. Her and Tokoyami were our opponents, but two don't know. I guess I was just worried she'd fall. Shoyuta stares at him for a long, confused moment. Her quirk allows her to literally stick to walls. You realize? Midoriya's face turns thunderous, and it's enough of a rare occurrence for Shuta's eyebrows to shoot up, arms falling to his sides. I do realize that. That's why I can't really explain it. I got distracted for no reason, tripped over a concrete slab, and made Todoroki burn me by getting in his way. I get that I messed up, and... Midoriya. The kid flinches, shoulders shooting up, and a soft blush gradually painting his cheeks as he slowly realizes that he's just snapped at his teacher. Oh, mister. Aizawa, I'm sorry. I didn't mean... I know. Shoyuta says, you're fine. Relax. Midoriya doesn't seem convinced, once again turning his gaze away to stare down at his twiddling hands. Listen, Shoyuta continues. You are overly considerate, to the point of being concerned for people that are capable of taking care of themselves. Azui is a strong student, plenty capable of taking care of herself in a situation like the one you were concerned about. But Shoyuta sighs, already regretting his words, because the kid's face has crumbled in the past few seconds since Shoyuta has begun speaking. It's admirable that you're so focused on other people's well-being, Seven, if it's not completely rational. Midoriya looks startled, surprise shining in the gaze now locked on Shoyuta from the white bed. If Hizashi hears about this, he knows he won't hear the end of it for, well, eternity. I can already tell just by all the trouble you've gotten into since arriving at this school that you probably won't cease with this reckless selflessness any time soon, so I'll make you a deal. Midoriya looks confused, one of his hands gripping the bed sheets once again. A deal? Yes, Shoyuta says, a small smirk painting his features. Last 1 month. Only a single month. Without getting into trouble. No wounds by your own making. Meaning no broken arms or legs or whatever. And no going against the rules of UA for your own ethical reasons. Nothing. Past his bitten lip, Midoriya mumbles out a quiet, and I'll sign that notebook you've been pestering me about. The kid had brought it into the classroom a few months before, saying that he collects heroes' signatures and all that. Strange for someone who plans on working with a lot of the heroes he admires so thoroughly. Shoyuta had seen him writing in the notebooks before. Sketches of heroes he recognized and heroes he didn't recognize. Paragraphs written of each. Kind of creepy, he thinks. A bit, but also a bit impressive in regards to Midoriya's observation skills. So, not particularly being a fan of the spotlight, Shoyuta hadn't been too thrilled to find out he had a section written about him. He'd shot Midoriya down again and again since then, ignoring each new method of persuasion the kid brought along. One of which was even the brilliant idea of bringing in Hizashi after hours to lecture him on the importance of appeasing fans. Shoyuta kindly reminded him that he literally lived with Midoriya now, in the same building, saw him every day, etc., etc. Nothing worked. The kid eventually moved on. Yet now, Midoriya's features brighten exponentially, his teeth releasing his gnawed lip and a smile that surely had the potential of blinding Shoyuta exploding across his face. No way. Really, sensei? Shoyuta sighs. Really, really? Midoriya laughs. A guffaw type of sound that pushes from his chest like he's just released a giant weight from his shoulders. Deal. I won't let you down, Mr. Aizawa. Shoyuta turns to leave with a lazy sigh. I'm sure you won't, kid. Now, don't give the old lady too much grief, all right? Okay, see you later. Midoriya, come on. Shura's voice comes out in a wispy huff. Stay with me. Almost there. Almost there. He wraps his arm further around Midoriya's hip, adjusting his grip on the kid's opposite forearm, and hefts him closer to himself. Midoriya lets him, putty in his hands, practically, doing whatever Shoyuta asks, shakily moving whatever Shoyuta needs him to move. No questions. It makes Shoyuta feel like screaming. They've been making decent progress. Midoriya's pushes forward, feet moving one after the other. He sags into Shura's side, letting the older man take the majority of his weight without comment. It's telling for Shoyuta, the kid being so willing to be helped, just knowing how unbothersome he prefers to be, though Shoyuta would never consider this instance to be bothersome at all. We're gonna make it, Shoyuta says, glancing around the area with a squint to fight off the billowing snow. You're gonna be fine, okay? Midoriya. It's a choppy grunt through gritted teeth, but it's enough. It'll have to be enough. He hasn't gotten the kid to say much. I'm sure All Might's already got a fire going, so it'll be nice and warm, okay? Shoyuta continues, just trying to keep the kid's mind occupied on something other than the biting chill surrounding them on all the sides, or the swaying of the trees in the wind, the spray of ice in their faces. At some point, he had pulled Midoriya's sodden mask up and over his face, fussing with the strange ears to keep them behind his head, forming a full hood hoping to provide some form of cover against the wind. It may not be much better, being soaked and almost frozen, but it's enough. Can you talk to me, please, Mid? A loud hacking cough from the kid cuts Shura's plea off and send the older man spiraling as he tries to get a decent look at Midoriya's face. He doesn't see much, just the pale as can be bottom half of his chin, upper face covered in green and no visible eyes, probably clamped closed. He's nuzzled his face into Shura's side, thankfully a relatively dry patch of cloth. A few more shakes of his shoulders imply some more hidden coughs into Shura's clothing. Shoyuta cringes, continuing to push them forward. Further. Midoriya manages to whisper loud enough for Shoyuta to hear him over the howling wind. Strange wheezes following ever other word. Fur. I'm thinking 2 more miles, kid. Only 2. We can manage that, right? Midoriya hums. The hand he has wrapped in the back of Shura's uniform loosens, and it's the only clue Shoyuta has to prepare before Midoriya's knees give out. He luckily has a good hold on him, predicting this before they had even started walking. He squeezes the kid's waist, squishing him to Shura's side, and falls to the ground alongside Midoriya. He's examining Midoriya within a moment's time, his free hand releasing Midoriya's arm and feeling for his neck and face, and anywhere that might bring some sort of reaction. Come on, Midoriya. He lightly slaps the side of his face, watching the eyelids twitch, but refuse to open. Izuku, Midoriya. Please open your eyes, kid. It's a fight, he can tell. Eyes rolling under closed lids, an edge to the brows above, and then they're wrenched open. A full body reaction where he flails his usable arm and gasps a few miserable breaths. You with me. Shoyuta pats his cheek one last time. and green irises clouded over with pain and delirium and confusion slide to look at him. We have to get back up, Midoriya. There's something that erupts from his mouth that's split between a sob and a wet cough. But regardless, the kid nods and allows himself to be pulled from the ground. If the kid had fallen through the ice when the medics were still available to do anything at this facility, then Midoriya would probably already be getting seen by a doctor at a hospital piled with blankets and hot water bottles and warm for fluids and whatever else they do. Stitched up, arm casted. Perfectly fine. Give or take TH indeed for bed rest. But they don't have that type of luck, it seems. Because that's not how it's going. Midoriya lets out a couple of wet, terrible coughs into Shura's side, shouts, cringes, an angry and loathing glint in his eyes. Instead, he's forcing this miserable kid, who's severely hypothermic and hurt to walk, in order to stay as coherent and conscious as possible to safety, where he's going to get half-ass first aid by people who know the basics. In truth, Shoyuta doesn't even know for certain what supplies there are in the facility. A first aid kit, definitely, but will they have a change of clothes? Blankets, like a ton of warm blankets, because the image of Midoriya buried under tens of fluffy blankets is one thought that has Shoyuta fighting forward. Hell, Shoyuta isn't even positive the facility has plumbing, in case they eventually have to put Midoriya into a warm bath or something once he's been stabilized. You weren't even supposed to do that. But if the worst comes to worst, another cough. This one sending Midoriya keeling halfway over, grappling onto Shura's clothing desperately as he stumbles. Shoyuta keeps his hold, trying to pull Midoriya forward on their path, knowing that the sooner they get to All Might, the better their odds. Midoriya follows for a few more steps before keeling over once again with another mouth full of coughs. Another wet cough. I see can't BR, Midoriya. He can't what? He gets his answer in the next moment when Midoriya collapses to his knees. Shura's attempts at keeping him upright flat out failing. Midoriya coughs a few more times, trying to lift his broken arm to cover his mouth to no avail, possibly due to Shura's own interference. But then the kid inhales a horrendous wheeze that sends Shura's eyes going wide. BR, breathe. He can't breathe. Is he panicking? More wheezing as Shoyuta kneels further down to look at Midoriya's face. Come down, Midoriya. Inhale with me, okay. No response. Shoyuta grabs Midoriya's unharmed hand, pressing it to his own chest. Inhale. Midoriya tries. Shoyuta can tell, but another pained wheeze is all that comes. It's chopping, something popping in the kid's chest as he does so. Not panicking. He'd never dealt with it before personally. Usually medical personnel at hospitals were the ones to deal with it. But Midoriya didn't have the luxury of being at a hospital right now. This was secondary drowning. Water in the lungs that wasn't dispelled. Inflammation of the lungs. Impending pneumonia. SHT. Midoriya continues to hack as Shoyuta turns his attention away, examining the landscape. Anywhere. Literally anywhere. Just for a minute or two of reprieve from the wind and the ice. It doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to. There. A small alcove beneath a pair of trees. Roots forming a small enclosed space that has probably been the home of rabbits or foxes or whatever the hell lives on top of mountains. Midoriya, come oh. Shoyuta presses his hand back to Midoriya's hip to pull him up, but is found watching as the added pressure to his side sends Midoriya's eyes rolling back and his body lolling sideways into the snow as he continues to gasp for breaths that just won't come. Shura's body moves on its own, scooping Midoriya up under his back and knees and plowing through the snow towards the alcove. He has to get down on his knees, careful to not whack Midoriya's head on the frozen roots framing the entryway. He sets the kid down on the ground, squeezing in sideways and sitting right inside the entrance. Barely enough room. No room for stretching his legs out. Definitely. Midoriya, listen to me. By this point, it doesn't look like Midoriya can really listen to anyone. His fingers on both hands are grappling at everything they can get a hold of, his unwounded arm pulling at his hero uniform right above his chest, as if that would relieve whatever pressure he feels. Shoyuta only has one idea, but he isn't quite sure he wants to use it. Not when it's this cold. Putting ice-cold metal on skin is just asking for trouble. But Midoriya's mouth shoots wide open. staying gaped as he sucks in rapid, shallow breaths. Damn it all! Shoyuta rumbles, reaching towards his student. He has never seen Midoriya actually use his respirator, though he has heard about how he used it in one of his off-campus excursions with Mirko, apparently. Something about poison. Regardless, that means it does actually work, not just for show like most aspects of hero costumes seem to be. I'm going to put your respirator on you, Midoriya, Shoyuta warns, watching as the kid's arm flops down to his side. Clawing at the snow instead of his own chest. Don't fight it, okay? No response. Of course there's no response. Just a desperate croak accompanied by green glazed irises gazing up at us pleadingly. Hang on, Shoyuta murmurs gently, the sound of his voice foreign to his own ears. Just hang on. The hand scrabbling desperately for purchase in the snow suddenly shoots up and grasps at Shuta's sleeves. Shoyuta halts for only a moment, quickly scooping the kid's hand into his own, yanking the respirator around Midoriya's neck up. He positions it and presses it to Midoriya's face. Midoriya inhales sharply, a strange gurgling sound that clears away after a few seconds. There you go, Shoyuta whispers, eyes locked onto Midoriya's own clouded-over ones. Wide open and shocked, here you go. Just breath, kiddo. Just breath. It's ice cold, burning against his fingertips, and most definitely even worse for Midoriya, at least he thinks. Midoriya doesn't even flinch at the unbearable cold metal pressing against his face. It sends a shock of fear racing down Shuta's spine when he realizes that Midoriya probably can't even feel the thing. Too numb to the cold. What the kid does do, however, is continue to inhale deeply and desperately, back arching out of the snow, his hand and fingers jerking in Shuta's grasp. His boots scrap against the frozen dirt revealed in the small dwelling they have found. It's a full-body reaction. Shoyuta gently settles his other hand on top of the respirator, keeping it in place, leaning forward so he can press his forearm against Midoriya's shoulder to keep him laying flat. He's still gasping for breath. He's laying in the snow, clothes practical frozen solid, and his own body closely following. Frost scribbled across his skin and making his eyelashes and hair white. So cold he isn't even shivering anymore, so cold he can't even bleed anymore, with an arm strapped to his chest because he shattered the damn thing again. And all Shoyuta can do for him is strap his own freezing respirator to his face so he doesn't suffocate and hold his hand, watching the digits slowly fade to purple. Shota is wearing gloves, but they're soaked from diving into the water, knees deep to drag Midoriya to shore. If he had been patient and dragged the kid to shore with the capture weapon, then his gloves would be dry and would currently be around Midoriya's hands instead. If he had that. No, it's good he didn't drag him out by his arm. It was already broken enough. Either way, there was going to be a problem. An accident. It was all an accident, brought on by a villain, granted, but an accident nonetheless for the two of them. No way in hell he would have been able to wait patiently in that situation. His rationality be damned. Shoyuta peels his gloves off vigorously, bowing his body over Midoriya's to prevent whatever wind was managing to snake its way into the small burrow from going toward the kid. He takes both of his hands, even the one shattered and bruised and bloodied, fingers scrunched up and hanging limply in the makeshift cast. Midoriya's fogged eyes track Shuta's movements, as his teacher scoops both hands up into his own bigger ones and just holds them for a moment, breathing through his hands to get some warmth back into the ice-cold flesh. Shoyuta has the sudden and hilarious, for some reason, discovery that his phone is no longer on him. In the lake, crushed in the snow somewhere. He doesn't know, but he realizes he hadn't even thought to check. Whether that's because he subconsciously recognized the absent weight in his pocket, or was simply too preoccupied to consider phoning someone now of all times, he doesn't know. It's enough for him to huff a breath and bow his head even further down. He finds himself lost in thought for a moment then, playing through their situation and mapping out how to get to All Might's outpost from here. They must have already walked 1.5 miles at least. Definitely not more than 2. It was 3 to get to All Might, so to get there, it'll probably take them another half hour, at least, unless the two of them suddenly get a big burst of adrenaline somehow. After that, he'll have All Might warm Midoriya up somehow. Blankets, Probably the fireplace each outpost had. Etc. Etc. He'll call Hizashi, check on his students. Bakuga seemed to have a concussion, and Azui was no doubt having issues, too. She couldn't handle the cold. The few other injuries his students had could easily be taken care of, even without medical help from the outside. They need to call emergency personnel, too, assuming Mike didn't already do that. And Midoriya's fingers jerk in his hand. Shoyuda turns his face up to catch Midoriya's gaze again, to make sure he's all right. Aura's all right as he can be. He's still gasping for air. Shoyuda can feel the rise and fall of his chest through their connected hands, so close to the kid's torso. The gasps are fainter, though, quieter. That doesn't seem right to Shoyuda. Midoriya's eyes are slipping closed. Shoyuda almost misses it. The way Midoriya physically fights to keep his eyelids open, snapping them open every time they close. But he's losing. It's obvious he's losing. Midoriya, stay awake for me, Shoyuda calls, releasing their joined hands and taking the kid's face into his hands instead. We're about to head out again, and then it'll only be a few minutes, all right. Midoriya! Essen! He coughs painfully, the sound echoing in the metal of the mask. MCLD-TRD. His eyes fall closed again, forcefully being wrenched open a second later, despite the ice crystals forcing his eyelashes to stick together, with a pained huff of breath. Shoyuda, very suddenly, does something he hasn't done in years. He panics. Midoriya doesn't even flinch when Shoyuda shoves his arms under his back and knees, lifting the kid as he forces himself up to his feet. He's charging through the snow before his brain can even catch up with his actions. The only thing flooding his senses and his thoughts is the desperate need to prevent the life in his arms from flickering away. Midoriya's head lolls limply over his arm, the small sounds of his gasps echoing inside the metal of his respirator. He isn't even thinking, doesn't find himself pondering much of anything other than the way his feet slosh through the snow one step at a time, or the weight now laying limply in his arms, somewhat stiffened by the cold. Damn it! Why is it always this kid who has to go through SHD like this? There's a small cough under the respirator. It causes a strange metallic echo, but regardless it seems less intense than the ones earlier. At least they have something. A bit of a victory for a short moment. Zizuisen. Another wet cough splitters under the respirator. W's dubbing. What? Shoyuda breathes out heavily, trudging as quickly as he can through the snow. Angry. I'm not angry. Problem child. Don't worry. HN. Midoriya's eyes shutter closed again. Shoyuda jerks his shoulder, causing the kid's head to bob, and his eyelashes flicker open once more. Jigyu. W's stuttering. Shoyuda cringes at the kid's repetition, clearly still very confused. It will probably keep getting worse. Shoyuda shouldn't expect anything else. Keep talking to me. About what? Anything, Shoyuda says, stopping in his tracks to attempt to properly navigate. He believes he's still going in the right direction, so he hefts Midoriya up higher in his arms and continues forward. Take your pick, kid. I know you've been dying to ask Emmy questions about my hero work. Shoyuda cringes at his word choice a moment later, waiting for the kid to respond. Midoriya hums, his half-lidded eyes staring up at Shura's face. Snow is now sprinkled on the dark green mask, and Shoyuda gets a sudden violent urge to try and brush it all off, from the mask, the hair, the eyelashes. Everything. Daniel Egomai. Because he's an attention grub who ignores rationality in favor of emotional constitutions. Next question. Shoyuda can see the barest hint of a smile in Midoriya's eyes, can practically picture his blue lips under the mask smirking up at him. Shoyuda trips, landing roughly on his knees, and almost drops Midoriya, having to use one of his arms to leverage himself upward. Midoriya grunts, but does little else, completely limp in Shura's grasp as he grapples him back into his arms, rising back to his feet with a huff. He keeps running. Midoriya doesn't speak. Keep going. Midoriya hums. Was UND Durground W work like? Shoyuda sighs, thinking about his answer for only a short moment, Not as grandiose as us normal heroics teeth that are in the spotlight, but it has its perks. No media, practically. WH'd, RTH the D1 sides. It's... Shoyuta really doesn't want to talk about this while a child is growing colder by the minute in his arms. It's not as pretty either. I've had nightmares about the thing I've seen. Plenty of times. Midoriya hums, dead people. Shoyuta cringes. Thousands of memories of lifeless eyes looking back at him. Yeah. Why yeah. Midoriya mimics. Zawa sensei. Yes. Midoriya's eyes are lifelessly gazing up at Shoyuta, head bobbing back and forth, lolling against his shoulder. Purple has spread even further across his cheeks. He looks exhausted. Am I dying? Shoyuta nearly trips again. No, you're not dying, Midoriya. BBU. You're not going to die. I promise you. Okay. Midoriya sniffs, a sudden wobble to his voice as he says, I don't want to die yet. Mid. I W1 It's a small plea, nothing more. Frozen tears begin rolling down Midoriya's cheeks, leaving heavier frost in their tracks along the respirator and dampened spots in the already damp mask. And it about devastates Shoyuta. I want TTTC my mom. You will. You'll see her soon, Midoriya. I promise. And he's suddenly struck by how important the thing in his arms is. In his line of work, it's best to leave emotions out of it. People die, that's how it is. And so it's best to not think too much into the people you're saving. But now he thinks about all the people this boy loves, all the things he loves to do, and all the people who love him right back. How many different aspects of so many people's lives would be changed if he fails to get this kid some help, including his own life. He runs faster. I swear, Midoriya, you're going to be fine. Shoyuta practically shouts over the wind billowing past them at his pace. You're gonna get warmed up. Get some pain meds, some medical help. All Might will be there. Shoyuta knows the kid is an All Might fanboy, so that should bring some comfort. Then we'll get you to the hospital. Your mother will be there waiting. I promise. I promise. Okay. He trudges through the snow, bowing out of the way of a tree. In the distance, he thinks he may see some hint of a light. But he looks down at Midoriya's face, tucked into his hero costume's fabric, eyes completely closed. Something akin to peace riddling his features, just like earlier when he first pulled him from the lake. Midoriya! Shoyuta keeps moving forward on instinct, but his mind is occupied, jostling the boy in his arms. His limbs and head loll aimlessly, completely senseless about the world around him. Midoriya! Wake up! Shoyuta tries again, jostling him rougher. Now. There are lights, and they get brighter and brighter as he pushes further through the billowing snow. If nothing else, he's close. He's close. So this kid better not die on him now. 1 week before the man came to UA, Aizawa can't really say he knew All Might very well. Sure, he had worked with him before. Not exactly directly due to their vastly different styles of heroics, but it was a bit difficult to avoid working with him when the man was known for showing up at the last moment to save large amounts of people. It was aggravating, to a certain extent. His showmanship, his demeanor, even. Most of the time, Aizawa couldn't stand it, couldn't understand his mindset when it came to his decisions on how he conducted his work. Even so, there was respect. Lots of it. For obvious reasons. Anyone who put themselves in a position of possible harm for someone else was given Aizawa's respect, even if they were also given his condemnation of stupidity for being reckless at the same time. That's the exact position Yagi had found himself in for numerous years up until Kemino after that. It was just strange. You want me to what? Yagi splutters, and Aizawa only offers him an unimpressed look in return. You heard me. Well, yes, All Might says, rubbing the back of his head. His paperwork lies forgotten in front of him. Cursor on his computer blinking in one spot on his unfinished document. Rubrics of the last foundational hero studies class assignment. I was more asking why, I suppose. Aizawa sighs, leaning back in his own desk chair and staring up at the ceiling. We need another chaperone for the trip. I already got Mike to agree. as if he needed much goading. So it'd be the three of us if you're up for it. Yagi blinks. Wouldn't they want someone more capable? For security purposes. Yagi's expecting another unimpressed look. The same look he seems to be on the receiving end of more often than not. Instead, he gets more of a surprised look, like he had just condemned hero society as a whole instead of asking a simple question. Yagi feels the need to shrink down under the gaze, but doesn't. Why wouldn't you be capable? Now, All Might is the one to give an unimpressed look, grimacing tiredly at Aizawa. Come on now, Aizawa. Do I really need to spell it out for you? Aizawa quirks an eyebrow. Yagi can feel the stare of Namiri from across the room, trying to hide behind her computer monitor, but ultimately failing. Okay, apparently he does. I'm basically quirkless now. A chaperone position would be better suited to someone else, like Midnight. The called-out woman ducks further behind her computer. Sorry, I can't. Class 3C has a planned test for one of the days Aizawa and Nedzu have picked out for the trip. Plus, I agreed to sub for Mike. All Might gives her a tired look. Turning back to Aizawa, my point still stands. Aizawa shrugs. Regardless, I don't need you there for security or anything. The facility has plenty of that, including a few pro heroes on site as well. There's more to being a teacher at UA than fighting threats. You realize Aizawa pauses, considering his words, or a hero for that matter. Yagi gapes at him. Aizawa, are you being comforting? Namiri snorts from behind her monitor. The man's a softie. Don't let him fool you. Aizawa rolls his eyes. Besides, if you really look at it, I'm practically quirkless a vast majority of the time, especially against mutation quirks. And most people are quirkless when fighting against me. Yagi doesn't respond, only smiles, thinking of multiple conversations he has had in the past, some ending with regrettable answers. Thank you, Aizawa, Yagi says, leaning back over his keyboard and continuing his grading. I'd love to chaperone with you and Mike on the trip. Aizawa groans, standing from his desk and swiping up some folders. Don't get gushy with me. I should have never said anything. Yagi can't stop the small smile on his face from widening slightly. In the sudden hyper-focused nature of Shuta's task, he only feels numb. Numb to the burning in his lower legs and arms, and now bare fingers. Numb to the thrumming of his heartbeat in his broken nose, to the ache in his ribcage, even to the biting cold against his face. His breaths come in hefty huffs that fog out in front of his face with every exhale, and his legs move on instinct, one after the other. A stumble, really, uncoordinated and clumsy, but he stays on his feet and wades through the thick snow even so. He isn't even sure if he can feel his feet anymore. He tries not to think about it. The lights become brighter with every step, and the weight in his arms becomes heavier with each as well. The task is arduous and everlasting. Halfway from where Midoriya passed out and the building, Shoyuta is fairly certain he allows his brain to become numb as well. It's always been easier like that, to get through the task at hand, and then let the processing begin. So he does just that, eyes set on the lights ahead, and definitely not on the pale face blooming with vibrant and sickly colors across it hanging limply from his elbow. My own fan art, the lights are white, making the blizzard's density even more obvious. It ignites the white snow around the building, creating a wall of white rather than the unseeing endlessness from earlier. Somewhere, Shuta's fairly certain the sun began lowering in the sky. There's 4 lights that Shoyuta can make sense of, and if this building is just like the one he was stationed at, then the door would be in between the 2 central lights. Looking ahead, squinting against the flakes falling into his eyes, it's obvious that the door is not on the side they're on. Fucking great, Shoyuta grumbles as best as he's able through numbed lips, hefting Midoriya closer. He's losing his strength. He's been able to tell for a while now, at least the past mile he's had to walk since their last pit stop to get Midoriya's breathing situation all taken care of. He can still hear the echoing rasps from within the mask. Anyways, Shoyuta shakes his head. Focus, damn it. Don't get caught up on the kid's condition anymore. Not yet. Safety first. Warmth first. The point being, the kid has obviously been getting heavier as the minutes tick on, and Shoyuta isn't sure if that's just Midoriya's weight slowly turning more and more into dead weight, or if it's Shura's own endurance wearing thin. Probably a mix of both, if he were to guess. Shoyuta gets within feet of the building, close enough to see the details of the brickwork patterns along the side. He stumbles around it, noting how the other side didn't have a door either, which meant when he turned the next corner, door. It's so simple, and yet it's hilarious how Shoyuta immediately feels the word playing on repeat in his head. Door, 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 door. He almost falls to his knees right there, hoping that maybe All Might will see them laying out in the snow from one of the cameras in a few seconds tops, assuming he's doing something else inside, and can fish them out of the sea of white somehow. No, he can't. They can't wait. And they can't risk not being seen at all until it's too late. How he even considered that an option, just a few more feet. Damn it, just a few more feet. God, he wished he had his sleeping bag Shoyuta practically faceplants against the door, legs shaking beneath him in the now shallow snow around him. The depth the result of the building blocking the vast majority of the torrent. Midoriya's shoulder is the only thing that prevents him from full-on falling against the door, crammed against the cold surface and successfully propping the older man up. Shoyuta sighs heavily, pushing Midoriya's knees to the door with his body weight. It frees up his right hand, and, ignoring how the limb shakes almost dramatically, Shoyuta reaches and knocks as loud as he can manage 3 times. He would yell, too, but he isn't very convinced he has that in him right now. He leaves Midoriya like that, his legs crushed between Shura's body weight and the doorway. Shoyuta instead uses his free hand to quickly and tenderly flick frozen curls out of Midoriya's face, using his fingers to brush off some buildup of snow on his cheeks as well. It shouldn't be there, it's wrong. Anything cold touching the boy at this point is wrong, and Shoyuta feels almost angry at the sight of all the snow covering the kid's clothes and hair. It's just terrible. So bad. The doorknob twists slowly, and it's a testament to how slow Shura's thinking has become that the almost sneaky way of it twisting doesn't strike him as odd the next moment definitely does though. The door rips open, the bright lights from inside forcing Shoyuta to squint. He stumbles backwards, unintentionally letting Midoriya's feet and legs fall to the ground. The next moment, there in the doorway stands All Might. His hulking form, it's rarely seen now, but it has the same imposing effect as ever before. Eyes overshadowed, and an angry look in his eyes. In that same moment, Shoyuta has twisted his body around, still able to see All Might perfectly well, but also able to use his own body to shield Midoriya. His hand clasps the kid's head to his chest, the other one tangled in the clothing atop his abdomen. At a later date, Shoyuta might think back on the moment and wonder why exactly he reacted as he did. It was obvious the older man didn't know it was them, but somewhere in his fogged mind, Shoyuta saw the flash of a hulking villain, hand reaching out towards them ready to deliver wounds that they had inflicted on the enemy first. He hadn't thought, he had just moved. He shakes the thought away. All Might's eyes widen, and then all Shoyuta can see is steam floating around them. Aizawa. Shoyuta says nothing. He exhales heavily and practically deflates, slumping against nothingness and feeling his grip on the kid lessen exponentially. Oh my! All Might exclaims, clasping Shura's shoulder firmly. Shoyuta glances sideways at the man. His golden hair is being swept wildly by the wind, snow already catching in it in the few moments he's been outside. His hollowed blue eyes are locked on Shura's own, squinting due to the blizzard. Shoyuta can empathize. Obviously, he notes, however, how the older man definitely does not see the kid half-hanging Anji Shura's arms. Not yet anyway. I'm so sorry I couldn't see who was at the door through the monitors. Too much snow. Thought you might have been. Shoyuta can see the exact moment All Might is finally able to recognize Midoriya. His eyes scrunch up, gaze glancing around Shoyuta curiously. He probably sees the green, Shoyuta guesses, since Midoriya's face is pressed against Shura's own shoulder, the chill of his respirator biting cold burns along his neck. He would hiss if he wasn't so focused in keeping the black spots in his vision at bay. All Might's eyes grow, so large Shoyuta is pretty confident he's able to see some of the white of them. His mouth drops open, his face appearing so much more hollow than normal. It's as if a flip switches in All Might's mind. Some instinctual sense he developed long ago that couldn't go away even in retirement. Like sirens going off in his head telling him to move. His eyes narrow, and he grabbed a fistful of Shura's sleeve and the green fabric on Midoriya's back, and somehow manages to yank both of them past the door's threshold and into the warmth of the shelter, even with his limited strength. Shoyuta forces his feet to move with All Might's guiding hand around his bicep. He had pushed himself to keep moving outside with solid point in front of him, motivated only by the waning weight in his arms, now slipping from his grasp more and more with each passing second. Midoriya's feet scrape against the ground as both he and All Might grapple with him. Black pushes further into Shura's vision, the shivers running up and down his body, making themselves more known in comparison to All Might's still and warm body. Even so, Shoyuta manages to get some form of coherent thought out. Gee, Shura's voice comes out in a nasty croak, so he tries again. Get the door! All Might, for all he annoys Shoyuta on a day-to-day basis, obliges without comment. He releases Shoyuta and rushes past, fighting the wind as he pushes the door closed, and as Shoyuta drags his feet further into the living space. Tall ceilings, computer monitors grouped together in the corner on a desk that show the security feed from the cameras spread around this area of the mountain. An uncomfortable-looking couch and armchair directly in front of a fireplace. The floors are concrete, and the walls match. Everything reinforced to withstand pretty much anything, whether it be quirks, the weather, or an avalanche of some kind. On the far side of the room is the doorways to two other rooms, probably where the building's storage is, as well as the bathroom and kitchen area. It's identical to the outpost he was stationed in, the one where all his stuff is God. What he would give to have his sleeping bag with him now. For Midoriya, if not himself, too. They both could probably fit in the thing before he can give warning to Yagi. Shoyuta has collapsed to his knees, Midoriya's weight dragging him further down. He drops the kid as gently as he can manage before completely keeling forward onto his forearms, bowed over Midoriya's still form, shivers racking his body. He can hear Yagi swear a few times, can sense the older man scrabbling about around him, and Midoriya. There's a sudden gentle, yet secure pressure on his shoulder. Zawa, it's All Might, Yagi, gripping his shoulders and speaking loud and clear, and for some reason this doesn't seem odd to Aizawa. It's like how he spoke before his powers had dwindled to nothing, when he was still the #1 hero. Can you hear me? Aizawa nods. Yeah, just need a moment. And then Yagi is gone. Ish. Shoyuta knows somewhere in his mind that the blonde man is actually just fluttering around the area, trying to piece together a game plan. Firewood tumbles from a neat stack to his left side, and only moments later they're being chucked into the fireplace, tugged around by All Might's bare hand. He apparently didn't have a fire going before they got there, or else say he wouldn't be able to touch it. Shoyuta pushes himself backwards, away from Midoriya, though he can't tell how far away. He can't quite tell exactly what he ends up landing on, either, but throws out a wild guess that it's the cushion of the armchair. His back presses against the cushions while his shivering body leaves a puddle around him on the concrete floor. His hair hangs in his face in frozen clumps, snow falling from it every few seconds, adding to the wet spot he's managed to make. God, okay, he needs to focus. The black spots have taken up the vast majority of his vision now, his eyelids heavy and fighting against his stubbornness to stay awake. He wasn't done yet. He still had work to do, even if All Might, Yagi, whoever the F was there to assist now. All he can see is the outlines of the room in front of him, blobs of colors blending into one another. He knows his eyes are wide open because he can feel his dry eyes screaming at him even if he can't actually make sense of the sights in front of him. He can hear echoes of something, too. Low droning, can't tell what, though. He inhales and exhales repeatedly, long and drawn out, trying to bid away the darkness. And it works to a certain degree. Spots still dance in his vision, and he feels the weight over him still, tugging his eyelids down, but the scene in front of him starts becoming clearer. The sound around him also come back to him, still echoing, sounding far away, like he was in a completely different room from them, even though, As he focuses, he knows that the source is right in front of him. My goodness! Young Midoriya! All Might's voice parries through various emotions all the time, both in this form and his more energetic ones. But Shoyuta can't say he's heard. The certain shakiness from the older hero like this very much. If at all. What happened to you? My boy, can you hear me? Midoriya! All Might is kneeled next to Midoriya, hands outstretched and looking like he's completely lost as to what to do. His hand comes to rest gently on the respirator sitting on Midoriya's face, glistening in the small fire only feet from the kid's head. He grips the respirator, turning it and Midoriya's face slowly from side to side, examining him. He rips his hand away almost immediately, though, rubbing his fingers together. The biting cold of metal older hero's brow furrows. He reaches for the mask again, with the clear goal to remove the offending piece FO metal from the kid's face on his mind. Shoyuta tries to speak in that moment. He isn't sure why, maybe to explain the situation or to direct the man or anything, but nothing come out of his throat but a low croak that isn't really audible at all. All Might removes the mask with a disgusting suction pop, pushing the strap off of his head and setting the thing on the ground beside Midoriya's head. It's left an angry red, raw ring around Midoriya's mouth and nose. Skin practically peeled off upon removal, and All Might's face completely crumbles at that, and he leans forward, gently tapping the sickly cheek. Izuku! Shoyuta understands, really. He's had the past however long to understand what needs to be done and act in order to accomplish it. But All Might has been unexpectedly thrown into the middle of this. He hadn't even been aware of Midoriya's group being attacked, as far as Shuta's aware, unless he and Mike had been in contact while Shoyuta was working on getting himself and Midoriya to shelter. Regardless, now is the time for action, not emotion. Shoyuta wets his chapped lips, clearing his throat. All Might, the retired hero, seems to have not heard him. Tapping Midoriya's face lightly, his own face mere inches from the kid's purple nose. His eyes were wide, unblinking as the older man searches for any sort of reaction. His other hand, the one not tapping rapidly against the pale cheek of their student, is gripping Midoriya's limp hand tightly. Shoyuta sucks in a deep breath, forcing himself into a straighter posture despite his trembling arms and everything. Yagi. Hesitantly, All Might's gaze switches from Midoriya's still form to Shoyuta, catching his eyes. Shoyuta takes a split second to just recall all the moments he had observed the older man and Midoriya, questions about the truth of their relationship, about how the number one hero knew the young, timid Midoriya from Eldred Junior High. All those questions seem to pale in comparison to the sudden realization that whatever that relationship is, it's clearly strong. All Might's teeth are clenched, veins popping out at his temple and jawline. His eyes are wide and yet scrunched around the edges, face paler than the normally tanned skin. Shoyuta forces himself to ignore all the telltale signs of obvious distress. Blankets. First aid. Now. His teeth chatter, his shoulders quiver, and so does his voice. But even so, Shoyuta forces as much strength as he can into the simple 3 words that are pushed from his mouth. It seems to work. Understanding dawns on All Might's face, and the older man literally shakes himself, backing up from Midoriya and quickly ripping off his suit jacket. His movements are fast and considerate as he fluffs out the jacket and drapes it over Midoriya, tucking it in around him, particularly delicate around the wrapped arm. All Might hesitates only a moment before shooting to his feet, tapping Shuta's shoulder once in reassurance before dashing off somewhere to find the first aid kit. Being on top of a mountain would almost guarantee that their first aid kits would have plenty for hypothermia treatment. Plus, All Might and himself had enough experience with first aid, even if hypothermia was a rarity among their experiences. First response was part of the job, and even if this instance was far more personal than most others, they at least had an idea of what to do. Shoyuta can faintly hear the clattering of materials as All Might digs around for the kit in the other room. He ignores it, rolling himself forward and crawling on his hands and knees towards the kid. Midoriya hasn't moved a muscle since they got there. Well, actually, since he fainted in the snow however long ago that was. His face is a strange mishmash of splashes of colors. Purples along his nose and eyelids, blues on his lips, red painting his cheeks and forehead. The ring of raw skin around his mouth shimmers red in the firelight. His pallor everywhere else could compete with the snow billowing outside. His breathing is obviously more labored without the respirator, but not dangerously so. They're going to need to put it back on, but probably after warming it up considerably and washing it. Shoyuta sighs shakily, coming to a stop by Midoriya's feet. Hang on, problem child. You've dealt with worse than this. Has he? God, he remembers the sports festival. How the kid snapped his fingers' bones like they were nothing over and over again, with little more than a flinch each time. That was strong to watch. He thought Mike was going to puke a few times during that round. And then there was the training camp, a nightmare through and through. And of course the entrance exam. Merely the beginning of it all. Still, all of those times had technically been the kid's own fault. Self-destructive, unable to control it, or simply not wanting to actually. A DSBLN problem. Shoyuta didn't think that was quite right, but it was definitely something. As though he had never used the quirk before. As though he didn't care what happened to him when he was put into precarious positions, the idiot. Shoyuta manages to get both of Midoriya's shoes off, fumbling with the straps and hooks that keep the iron soles on them. He tosses them away, haphazardly, crawling further up and pulling All Might's jacket down slightly to get to his arm brace. He only has to worry about one of them, the other one having been decimated by the uncoordinated attack from his student had flung from under the ice. Granted, this wasn't like those instances at all. This was an attack, something the kid shouldn't be having to deal with as much as he has at his age. Shoyuta was there. He was within reach and still couldn't prevent it. So it most definitely was not the kid's fault. And he was pretty sure, begrudgingly so, that he was going to have to tell Midoriya so plenty of times when he wakes up. Sometimes things like this just happen. No way to stop it. What matters is what is done after. I've got it. All Might is suddenly back, setting down a red box with a white plus on the top, along with a folded thermal blanket and what looks to be at least 4 wool blankets. Shoyuta only gives the supplies a sideways glance when All Might starts digging through the box, fumbling with the hooks keeping the arm brace secured on the kid's bicep. He grits his teeth, eyes narrowing. His fingers just won't cooperate, burning and numb at the same time, stiffer than he ever remembers them being. A low growl erupts from his throat. His movements become more desperate, just wanting to get the sodden and chilled clothing off of his student before it kills him. Damn it. A large hand crosses his vision and rests gently on Shura's wrist. Aizawa, please let me handle young Midoriya. Shura's gaze shoots up to meet All Might's. He finds himself staring into pools of calm blue. The stressed creases at the corner of his eyes are still present. But, as though Shura's sudden distress, making headway, had brought back his calm-in-the-face-of-adversity demeanor, he no longer appears to be lost to anguish anymore. Able to focus on a task now. A goal set in mind, just like Shoyuta had done earlier. Find a goal and pursue it. Let the rest come later. Take care of yourself for now. You're in a poor state as well. With a shaky sigh, Shoyuta relents, releasing the clasps and hooks he had been fumbling with at the cuff of Midoriya's brace. All Might hesitates only a moment before focusing on the exact same task. He manages to get the brace off in a matter of seconds. Whether it's because of his not-frozen fingers or the fact he somehow understands how they were hooked up better, Shoyuta isn't sure. He pushes himself away and only pauses when he decides on his first task. He rewinds the capture weapon from around his neck, pulling the long cloth close to Midoriya. The last thing he wants to do is try to yank it without realizing it's still attached to the kid in his fogged mind state. That'd be terrible. By the time he's finished, All Might has removed Midoriya's belt and hood, gripping the kid's shoulder as he tries to figure out how he should go about getting to the suit's zipper in the back. Shoyuta settles himself back at the base of the couch. He can now tell it's a couch. He saw it before backing up. He doesn't have to guess this time. He pulls his foot up, yanking at his boot. It sends a sharp burning sensation up his toes, through his foot and up to his knee. He hisses, gradually able to get the boot off before resting his now socked foot on the ground. All Might is still tending to the kid, his handling blending together into a blob of colors rather than exact images. It's good that they have help, that Midoriya has help, that they've made it to shelter, that they're safe and somewhere warm. Even if the two of them aren't warm themselves yet. The adrenaline Shoyuta had pumping through his veins has long since diminished. Gone. No need for it anymore. And his body reacts in kind, with one boot off clutched in hand. Shura's head lolls to the side, eyes tugging close to shut, demanding rest, demanding to give in to the conditions he had forced his body to bear for however long they were outside. He had found the villain, found his kid, and gotten them to safety. That was really all there was to it, right? Aizawa, his side hits the floor, head knocking against it strong enough to elicit a small grunt, eyes sliding shut immediately after. Aizawa, one day before, all right, everyone listen up, so we can get situated for the night without taking the entire night. The class in front of him quiets almost instantly, a habit they've gotten a hang of more or less since their first day of classes not so long ago. 20 pairs of eyes lock onto him, and he feels 2 more pairs from behind him. The 2 additional chaperones only feet away. You'll be split into 3 different groups and positioned next to one of 3 of the buildings within this facility. Present Mike, All Might, or I will be in each of these buildings monitoring your progress. We'll start the exercises tomorrow morning at dawn. He hears a few groans, easy enough to be heard within the quiet of the facility's command post. He sees a few of the security personnel wandering along their routes down the hall behind his class. Closer is the staircase which apparently goes up to the sleeping quarters. They haven't gotten that far yet, but he already can't wait to sleep off his weariness from traveling as far as they have today. Any questions? Nothing. He watches as a few curious eyes wander the halls of the facility, like they're in a hotel or something. It's relatively plain, fluorescent lighting in long strips down the hallway, windows along the length of the hallway. The entire building they're in is basically a hallway, wrapping around the entire facility while exposing the training grounds to the natural weather patterns of the mountain. Luckily, it looks like there won't be any terrible weather while they're there. Some snow. Possibility of a blizzard the following day. Nothing they can't handle, no doubt. The last time they did any sort of overnight field trip, they ended up getting attacked and having their trip cut short. He feels a tingle run up his body at the prospect of history repeating itself, but pushes it down, ignoring it. Fine, then go on and head up to the rooms. There's a few excited cheers. Plenty of roughhousing as the more boisterous members of the class rush to the stairs first. Ida yells something about representing UA and needing to be respectful and civil. But Kogu, Kirishima, Siro, Ashido, and Kaminari ignore him easily enough. The rest don't seem to care either way, with only Yurika and Midoriya seeming to listen. Shoyuta sighs through his nose, slouching further than he was previously. Why do I feel like living with these kids still hasn't prepared me for appearing in public with them? There's a clap on his back. Shoyuta, you gotta relax, man. I'm sure they're not that bad. You didn't see them at the training camp, he says. I thought they'd never go to sleep, even after I threatened them with more work. Hopefully it won't come to that, All Might says with a light chuckle. Let's have faith that this trip goes as smoothly as possible, yeah. Heck yeah, but not boring. A little excitement. Just a little. Shoyuta rolls his eyes. Give an inch, and they'll take a mile. Warmth. It's the first thought that shoots through his mind when he pushes towards some semblance of consciousness. The first feeling he takes note of. For some reason, one that he can't quite put his finger on, this is something special. Something he didn't have before. This is something that he had pleaded for, he just knows it. And yet, he can't remember the exact circumstances. He can't remember why he had been in a situation like that to begin, why to figure out the reason he was so desperate for what. For who? His eyes beckon him to open them, but he would flat out tell them to shut the hell up if it would do any good. The small pocket of warmth he's found himself in is too good to be ruined by some longing to figure out where he is. That will come later. Sleep is now. There's some low, incomprehensible drone somewhere nearby. It is easily ignorable, or so he thought, but it pokes and prods at his brain as though screaming, "Hey, this is important! Wake up! Now! This instance! Get up, you lazy half-human thing, and figure this out." And he would. He truly would if he knew what exactly his attention was needed directed towards. His mind clears ever so slightly at that, as though beckoning closer to consciousness whether he likes or not. If there's one thing he hates more than interrupted sleep, it's being left out on important information. STUMBLING here. Through all that, what? Even understand how he managed to get them both anywhere in that storm. Storm, right. There was a snowstorm, a flat-out blizzard. That's why the warmth was strange, and he wanted to cling to it for a bit longer. Even understand him, he was so out of it. And young Midoriya wasn't doing any talking at all. Midoriya. Should his eyes snap open with a gasp. The ceiling above him shimmers red for only a moment before he realizes he'd accidentally activated his quirk. The hair floating around his head lowers slowly, falling back to the pillow beneath his head. Pillow! The voice has stopped. Shoyuta shoots into a sitting position, seeing the colors and lights and walls around him get splotched with dark spots. He twists where he's sitting frantically scanning the space around him. Everything rushes back. The sirens he heard back at his outpost, the call about a villain having broke through the facility's barrier, Mike, his students, the fight, the lake, the blizzard, All Might, Aizawa. He twists around shapes blurring together. He stops, gaze immediately settling on him. All Might, golden hair and blue eyes watching him pensively from the other side of the room. His hands are raised in a consoling manner, eyes soft, and he gestures to Shoyuta. Be careful, or not Shoyuta. He gestures to. Shoyuta slowly gazes down to beside him. Green tufts of hair are the first thing Shoyuta sees. Slightly damp still, but beginning to defy gravity on the pillow shoved under his head just the same. As is natural, blankets, the same ones Shoyuta had tousled in his panicked awakening, are pulled up to his nose, the kids turned sideways. Shoyuta would even say he looks to be in recovery position, but he can't see the rest of his body. God! Shoyuta presses a shaky hand to his forehead. He kind of lost his cool for a second there. I wasn't really expecting you to wake up this soon, All Might says out of his line of sight. You really conked out there. Scared me half to death. Shoyuta glances at him from between his fingers. How long has it been? All Might quickly glances behind him at the computer monitors. About 2 hours, give or take. 2 hours. It wasn't just sleep either. He passed out, fainted, in front of All Might of all people too. Great. All Might can apparently sense his distaste for the situation which… Yeah, of course. This situation is all kinds of wrong smashed together into an ordeal that in reality has only taken up a few hours. But still, the man stands over at the threshold between the monitoring area and the living area uncomfortably, passing his weight from foot to foot, fumbling with his hands. His shirt is tousled, damp in some places, sleeves rolled up, hair a little more untamed than usual, if that's possible. It, wasn't a big deal, Aizawa. I wasn't really able to do a whole lot, anyways. Aizawa nods, pinching the bridge of his nose. Bad idea. He hisses, immediately wrenching his hand away when, instead of touching his bare skin, they touch tape and cotton. Tape and cotton. Bandage, basically. Not necessarily properly. He'd have to go to the hospital when this was all over for a variety of reasons, that being one of them, but still. Tape and cotton. What did you do? Aizawa asks, only now noticing the strange sound his voice makes, unable to really use his nose. Congested. He sounds congested. What did? And it's really only then that Shoyuta actually takes care to take note of his body's current condition. Sore. Of course it's sore. Unbearably sore. An ache deep in his torso, probably from being hit by the villain's quirk Midoriya's quirk. His feet are burning, a deep-seated chill running through his body, even though he feels like fire is licking at his toes and hands and face. And he's naked. Great! Well, I couldn't get you two onto the couch. I couldn't lift you. I could barely lift young Midoriya, so I settled for just leaving you two there, All Might says, stepping deeper into the living area and gesturing to the fireplace. You two were soaked to the bone. I put all of your clothes over there. Only when Shoyuta turns to look does he actually see the chaos that ensued after he'd lost consciousness. The med kit lays open about a foot away from the nest All Might had apparently tried to form as a replacement to the couch. Wrappers strewn around it. They're pushed into a messy pile, as though he had tried to bring some order to the mayhem. Firelight shimmers in a few puddles leading from the door, more growing from the sodden clothes laid out in front of the fireplace, draped over a small rack apparently meant for that sort of thing. His boots and Midoriya's sneakers barely catch his attention, tossed haphazardly in a pile beside the fire. The lights to the living area are off, illuminated only by the fire crackling a few feet from them and the computer monitors on the other side of the room. When he looks, there seems to be about 5 blankets strewn over top them, including a shock blanket at the very bottom. A few more are laid underneath them, keeping the chill of the concrete from truly affecting them. All Might was apparently pretty busy. Shoyuta glances back down to his student, seeing the way the fire dances off the metal of the respirator. Dances off of his paler. He feels the bite of cold from the skin still making contact with his thigh underneath the blankets. Body heat, ha. Shoyuta oh so carefully leans back over and shoves one of his hands underneath Midoriya's shoulders, lifting him and pressing him chest to chest with himself. He hisses softly at the ice-cold skin when it makes contact with his chest. He hugs the kid tighter to himself, anyways, bearing with it, and Midoriya just lets him do whatever, not even a twitch of his face. Tremors run up and down the kid's entire body. He thinks he can hear the soft clack of teeth tapping together every few seconds. His frown deepens. Oh, All Might says, lowering himself slowly onto the couch behind Shoyuta. Yes, I figured it was only what you would say, rational. It was, Shoyuta agrees, tugging the blankets up and over his shoulders and wrapping them tightly around Midoriya as well. Thank you. And he means it. Truly. All Might was probably expecting him to get angry at the invasion of privacy. And yeah, this'll probably be an awkward fact once the situation is all said and done. Especially since he's fairly certain Midoriya is just as bare as he is right now. But at the moment it's necessary. Him and the older, retired hero don't get along all too famously. They just don't click all that well. Able to work fine together, deal with hero work, have conversations every now and again, but that's about it. Their similarities are probably less than him and Hisashi, and that was saying something. But at the moment, Shoyuta can tell All Might's still feeling the effects of adrenaline, the way he hears the soft shake to his voice every few words, or can sense his eyes on the back of his head, like he isn't quite sure if he did enough or did the right thing at all. He gets it, especially for heroes often in the limelight. Heroes who are only meant to show up, dish out a strong attack, and go on their merry way. They weren't part of the cleanup. They didn't see the aftermath all that much. Not to say they never did, but it was fairly rare. Shoyuta remembers plenty of instances that he had been in charge of leading cleanup, having to watch as paramedics loaded people in and out of ambulances, sometimes discarding bodies for the coroners to take care of so that they could make room for patients who still had a chance. Those very same coroners having to scrape bodies out from underneath concrete slabs and from under buildings. It was those visions that kept him awake at night. Those visions that sometimes left a bad taste in his mouth when he spoke with any member of the top 10 heroes. The point being, All Might wasn't used to this sort of thing. He was trained for it, sure. Every hero was to a certain degree, some more than others. But that doesn't mean he knew what to do in the heat of things. Something as sensitive as first aid, as dangerous as severe hypothermia, of people fainting on him and having problems breathing. He didn't have as much experience as Shoyuta, and in this instance, with the individual in need being his own student, even Shoyuta had his issues trying to stay focused. He did good. All Might smiles kindly when Shoyuta manages to turn enough to see him, dragging Midoriya further on top of him. He has this look in his eyes still, almost haunted, a dark ring that makes his hollowed face even more pronounced. You're welcome. It truly wasn't a big deal. It was my job, actually. And he laughs. The sound somehow manages to lift something heavy in Shura's chest. Something that had been building there since he first left his base to go run through the snow to make sure none of his students died there on that mountain. He can see just another reason why this man in front of him was able to stay as the #1 hero for almost his entire hero career. You did scare me, though, like I said earlier. All Might continues, leaning forward and clasping his hands on his knees. I was surprised enough to see that it was you out there knocking at the door. Much more so to see you two's conditions. Shoyuta grimaces, hands clasping tighter around Midoriya's limp and shivering body, and a small, unrepressed shiver runs up his own spine at the memories. I wish I was able to warn you, at least. All Might hums. When I spoke with Mike a few minutes ago, he said he couldn't get a hold of you. I'm assuming you lost your phone in the snow somewhere during your ordeal. Probably, Shoyuta says dismissively. What did Mike say? Did he mention the rest of the class? Or about the authorities getting here? Of medical personnel making their way here? All Might waits patiently for all of the questions to leave Shoyuta. Well, he said that young Bakuga seems to have a concussion, and that everyone else is warming up without complication. They seem to be pretty concerned about the two of you, though, from what he was saying. As expected, Shoyuta thinks. He ran off after their classmate, and they heard nothing for up to 2 hours. For all they knew, the two of them died out there while they were getting warm. Just another thing to add on to their trauma cards, apparently. He also said his knee was wounded, but that it isn't too bad. Probably pulled something if I were to guess. All Might continued. Shoyuta nods, biting his lip when a particularly violent shiver runs through Midoriya's body, with enough gusto to cause a soft breath of air to puff out of the kid's respirator-covered mouth. And what about the medics? All Might sighs, something sad and almost wet-sounding. He hasn't been able to contact anyone, nor have I. I told him I'd call him back in about an hour, and he's going to keep trying to contact the police or the facility security personnel, though I'm not really thinking our odds are looking too great. Shoyuta quirks an eyebrow at him, silently questioning his meaning. All Might continues, and this isn't my strong suit, so forgive me, but I have a feeling that our phones not connecting is something more than simply nobody answering on the other end, or some bad weather. You think the connection has somehow been vandalized? Shoyuta asks, by the villain. Well, the mountains don't get very good signals at all, so there's a cell tower built specifically for this facility, right? All Might explains, a deep frown seated on his face. I wouldn't put it past someone who is willing to attack children to this degree. And I think Mike is only able to contact us, and vice versa, because of the relatively short distance we are from him. He gestures to Midoriya, his grimace deepening ever more. Shoyuta follows his gaze to the face pressed up against his chest, unconscious face facing up towards him. But I'm sure that we'll figure something out. Something warm slides down Shura's torso. Had been for the past few minutes, but he only really realizes once he has all the answers he's going to get at the moment. It startles him. Such a high contrast to the cold body he has in his arms that he thinks he's imagining it at first. But it becomes very obvious he isn't at that point. What's... He pushes Midoriya away slightly, holding on to him just the same. The kid's head lolls with the movement, a small grunt escaping him, but nothing else. That's good. Considering Shura's heart about leaps from his chest when he looks down to the space he felt the sensation without anything else happening. A streak of red runs down his own chest, and when he looks to Midoriya's own, he sees a similar red streak on his chest as well. He hadn't thought to look before, had been too lost in thought, too desperate for answers to their current situation, perhaps too desperate to ignore the elephant in the room that just so happened to be the kid lying next to him, to actually approach the most important problem they had on their plate at that moment. Damn it! What happened? The shoulder. Midoriya's shoulder. That had been stabbed. A wound transferred to him from Shura's very own knife. If he still had the thing on him. If it wasn't lost at the bottom of the lake or somewhere in the snow. Shoyuta knows for certain that the wound would line up perfectly with the blade. What was something akin to a pinprick to the hulk of a villain they'd encountered is much larger to Midoriya's smaller frame. There's gauze taped to the spot, red seeping through from the other side, and so Shoyuta carefully peels the swath away, flinging it to the pile of wrappers by the fireplace. He feels cold all over again upon seeing the wound exposed to air. It's about 2.5 inches wide. 3 starry strips trying their damnedest at keeping the edges together. One of them is already failing, peeling up from the skin, soaked in BLD, the flesh pulling upon without the strip's support. It's a mess, a terrible mess, and something dark squirms in Shura's gut just looking at it and thinking of the implications such a wound has. Where the wound came from. Oh, no, All Might grunts, quickly stepping away from Shoyuta and Midoriya towards where he has the med kit set up still. Not again! Shoyuta blinks at that, gently tugging the useless starry strip away from the wound. He flinches when he hears a small, miserable groan in retaliation. What do you mean by again? All Might kneels beside the two of them immediately, a fresh gauze in hand. It started bleeding pretty badly after the first hour since you had gotten here. I think it's 'cause he was warming you pennyways. I got it under control, but it must have gotten jostled or something. After taking a deep, calming breath, All Might forces his shaking hand to press the gauze to the wound. The pressure is enough to elicit another groan from Midoriya. Shoyuta grimaces again at the sound, but the frown slips off his face as soon as he sees the kid's eyelids flickering open. All Might must see it too, because the older man inhales sharply, seeming hesitant to keep the pressure up. He doesn't though. A focused and sure clench of his jaw takes over his almost fearful expression. Midoriya! Shoyuta tries, clasping his shoulder, his eyes open, green color vibrant against the pallor of his skin. Shura's conflicted between feeling ecstatic or fearful, noting the differing pupil sizes. And Nisakoriya. He's had enough concussions in his life to have heard the term a few times from doctors. Not necessarily serious, but still. Not good, either. Shoyuta sighs. He hit his head. There's a long pause before All Might responds. I know I saw. Midoriya. Shoyuta asks again. Louder. You there, kid? It becomes pretty obvious pretty quickly that the kid is, in fact, not there. His eyes flicker back and forth between their faces, but the eye are glazed, clouded by an unconsciousness that is pulling him back. A small quirk to his eyebrows every time All Might adjusts his hold on the gauze. His head lolls back and forth in a sort of rhythm, like he's unsteady despite laying down. Shura's lips thin at the discomforting sight, and then Midoriya sighs shakily, eyes closing once again. All Might lifts the gauze away from the wound. The cloth is blotched with red, but not soaked, meaning that the bleeding seems to have lessened, if not completely stopped completely. There's a suture kit in here, All Might mumbles, stretching to pull the med kit closer to the group of 3. I haven't trained on how to use them, though, and I didn't want to try. I didn't want to mess anything up more than it already is, so Shoyuta nods, looking down at the wound, as the blotchy mess it has left down Midoriya's chest and his own. He almost forgot about the BLD on himself. He'll need to clean that up as soon as he's able. I know how, Shoyuta says uncertainly after a moment of All Might fumbling with the other supplies in the kit. It's been a while since I've had to actually use the training I have for it, though. I'm a bit out of practice. All Might stares at him, finger tapping at the med kit in their silence before the older man breaks it. Do you want to try? Shoyuta hesitates before wordlessly reaching over and grabbing the suture kit from out of the box. It's a small thing, a box with a spool of suturing thread, small metal forceps, a needle holder, and alcohol wipes. Great! Okay, I'll try. He remembers from the training he got that wounds are fine with steri strips if they're small, as an inch or less and relatively shallow. That's 2 red X's for the situation, so he knows stitches should be put in. And if they aren't sure when medical help is going to get to the mountain, it is best to get it done if they have the skill set available to them. Do they have any spare clothes here? All Might seems confused by the equation for only a short moment. Oh yeah. Yes. Do you want me to go get something? Just some pants, Shoyuta responds, eyeing the kit in his hands as he sets it on the ground. I need to go wash my hands before trying this, and I would really rather be semi-clothed to do that. All Might snaps his mouth shut. All right. Of course. Obviously. I'll be right back. We don't have any anesthetic, do we? All Might half-heartedly looks through the box, but Shoyuta can tell that he already knows that they don't. It's just another thing adding to the weight he feels when he finally measures up the sterilized needle to the task at hand. He knows this won't be pretty. Knows that once Recovery Girl gets sight of his stitch job, he's going to get hell for it. But if it makes the rest of this ordeal easier in the long run for Midoriya, then he'll just have to deal with the old lady's wrath. All right then, Shoyuta says, clearing his throat and glancing All Might's way. Get ready. He's probably going to react to this. And he does. Really. Shoyuta pushes the needle through the brutalized flesh, and Midoriya's eyes immediately snap open, his broken arm jerking up and somehow managing to snatch a hold of Shuta's wrist. He grunts, feeling nauseated when he's almost certain he can feel the broken bones grinding together in the tight hold. All Might shoots forward, pressing one arm down against the kid's collarbone to keep him flat, and the other manages to loosen the broken hand's hold without getting too aggressive with it. Although there were broken fingers, it probably didn't take any effort whatsoever. Shuta's going to desperately need a vacation after this. It's all right, Midoriya. Shoyuta tries, knowing how confusing this probably is. Already wiped out from everything else going on with him. Midoriya wouldn't understand why he's suddenly getting hurt seemingly by the individual who's supposed to help him. And God, he doesn't want to see that hurt look directed his way. Betrayal shimmering in the glazed eyes. Take a deep breath. I'll go as fast as I can. Wah. He has to keep going. Get this over with. And then they can figure something out about the pain. They still need to do something about the broken arm. All Might had unwrapped it from the soaked capture weapon he had used initially, leaving it exposed and without support for the time being. That's going to be a pain, too. I'm sorry, Midoriya. He pushes the needle further, trying to ignore the tremble of both his hand and All Might's beside him, trying to ignore the low screams and groans, ones he knows would be kept quiet if the kid was in his right mind. Though he doesn't know how to feel about that fact. They should have never come here, to this facility. All this sufferingness is all his fault. The more time that goes by, the more Shoyuta begins to think All Might's theory is correct. It didn't really make sense to him initially, the thing about the mountain cell tower and blah blah blah, but Shoyuta can't really think of anything else. It's probably not damaged because of the fact that Mike has been on the phone with them at least 3 times since Shoyuta woke up, screaming over the line, making his ears ring. All Might's teasing glint in his eye, and the small smile on his face was enough to make the base they're stuck in feel a little more lively, at least for a few minutes. The point of the matter is that no contact has been made, still. Every time they try to call anyone else, the phone pings a long, dead drone on the other end. Not even the police can be contacted. Even the few private numbers they have of officers they've made acquaintances with over the years seem to be unable to answer. All Might even tries his detective friend, Takachi. Nothing. It's irritating. Just another obstacle that they really could live without. Just another thing to add to their list of problems. He remembers the droning thought he had when he was out in the blizzard. Just get to warmth. Just get to safety. After that, it'll be easy. But apparently not. Every step they take, it seems a new obstacle rips from the woodwork just to give them a strong time. The villain attack, the blizzard, the lake-shattering Gand, everything that came after. He can still feel the BLD caked under his nails, even if he had finished scrubbing them clean almost half an hour ago. He tries to ignore the raw feeling along his knuckles and fingertips. They have enough stocked here that we could last as long as it'll take for someone to notice something is wrong, All Might says, and his voice is apprehension leaking into it. Like he can sense the anger and frustration festering beneath Shuta's skin, and that won't take long. Shoyuta shakes his head, rubbing his eyes in lieu of pinching the bridge of his nose, already having experienced that mistake. He paces along the threshold of the living area and the monitoring section of the building, thinking, just thinking, we signed up for a week here. We won't be expected for another. What time is it? All Might swivels in his chair, looking at the monitors. Half of them are just black screens, the cameras outside completely covered by snow. The others aren't faring too well either. Usually there would be staff members available to clear them off every now and again. Now he's not too sure there's any staff remaining to clear them off. even if that was a priority. At 2 a.m., Shoyuta huffs a dry laugh. So it's breaking into our second day here, meaning we'd be stuck for 5 more days, 6 nights. At least. That's only if the storm doesn't let up. Remember, we checked the weather. It's not meant to be all that bad. The blizzard should only last a little bit longer. And All Might gestures vaguely, resting his hollowed face in his abnormally large hand. We could walk down to somewhere we could get a signal, perhaps. To the facility's main building, the ring. Then figure out the situation from there. Only one of us would be able to go. In that case, Shoyuta cuts in, continuing his pacing. All Might pauses. I'm not sure how comfortable I am with that idea. What? Shoyuta eyes him warily, already predicting where this is going. Why? We don't know the situation with the villain. He could potentially be out there still. You wouldn't be able to help much even if he was. Shoyuta pauses, every thought halting as he processes what he's just said. The words taste sour on Shuta's tongue, and he tries desperately to rein in his sudden outburst. All Might only offers him a level stare, no anger in his eyes. Just understanding. The man knows, damn it. Sorry, it's fine, Aizawa. All Might consoles, a small smile on his face. It almost looks sad. You're right, for the record. But regardless, 2 people in that situation would be better even if one of them is basically quirkless. Shoyuta gives in, ceasing his pacing. With a sigh, he moves further into the living room and falls backward into the armchair. A perfect view of the couch their resident, unconscious teenager now lays on. Half his torso is now wrapped in bandages, arm bent and bound to it. Tight! And meant to prevent him from even attempting at moving his arm. Shoyuta doubts the kid would really want to, but he's done crazier schemes in the past, after all. One of us would have to stay here with him. All Might doesn't respond immediately, but when he does, there's obviously apprehensiveness. He would come with the 2 of us, and Shoyuta feels like knives have stabbed themselves into his nervous system, because that brings up too many nasty possibilities. It first and foremost brings up the image of Midoriya back out in the F-blizzard, and Shoyuta isn't sure he's entirely as coherent as he thought he was, because he would literally rather anything else to happen than to see snow even touching the kid. But in the case that he humored the idea even slightly, he'd be the sole defender of their group of 3 then. Would All Might be able to carry Midoriya? In any way? Piggyback, fireman's hold, bridal style, sack of potatoes dragged. Probably not many of those. But the point is, if Shuta's job would be to defend them in case the villain out there isn't out of commission, which how could he not? Then All Might's job would be to carry their student. I'm perfectly capable of carrying him. Aizawa, All Might says, and Shoyuta gets the sudden jagged feeling across his back that the man can read minds or something. On my back, there won't be a problem. I may be far from as strong as I was a year ago, but I'm capable. He would have to be covered in blankets and such, too, if we choose to actually do this, he doesn't say. He's more than ready to fight tooth and nail with the older retired hero. But even so, no way would he even consider letting the kid back out in that weather without being bundled in warmth from the top to the bottom. He was still hypothermic. Last Shoyuta checked on him. Skin still ice cold, but he was shivering. And shivering was good. It meant his body was still functioning instead of slowly shutting down. Like the kid had been laying on the floor only feet away from where he is now, bundled in all the blankets All Might had brought out for them save for the single one said man, had forced Shoyuta to keep wrapped around his shoulders. He had planned on laying back down with Midoriya after the stitch job they did, or rather, after cleaning his bloodied hands from said stitch job. His hands were shaking so bad during it. And so All Might ended up getting just enough time to manage to get Midoriya settled on the couch instead of the floor. Shoyuta had proceeded to shove the thing closer to the fire, outright ignoring any offers of help from All Might. Probably, and we'd have to, those warm water bottles you used earlier when we were asleep. Does he still have those on him? Anyways, we'd need to bring those. Make it as warm as possible. If we have to do this, then it's highly dangerous because we're still trying to get his temperature correct and it's just not doing it. I'm Aizawa. Aizawa shoots from the chair. He was sitting in like his name being called, had sent electricity jolting through him, and slices through the room in 2 even steps, stepping right up to the couch. Midoriya, as though in greeting, gives off a few coughs that echo metallically into his respirator. His purple, but much fainter purple, eyelids stay closed, however. Shoyuta frowns, but eventually sits Midoriya up and slides himself behind the boy and onto the couch, the kid now laying practically on top of Shoyuta. Aizawa. Shoyuta just shakes his head pensively, rearranging the blankets and wrapping his arms around Midoriya. The kid's skin is still cold enough to send a chill up Shuta's back when his back is pressed to his chest. I would really rather have him stay here. All Might still over in the swivel chair by the monitors. Now leaning forward on his knees. I understand what you're... No, you don't understand. You dealt with the aftermath. I dealt with the ordeal. You can't understand. Both of them stay quiet. Shoyuta didn't expect to continue, but the words start flowing from him heedlessly. I just stood there and watched as he sank beneath the ice. Just stood there, and when he broke through to give me a way to get to him, he shakes his head as if to clear his thoughts. But he's opened the floodgates, and he knows All Might is going to want answers, and so All Might walks him beside the couch he's laying on, looking down at him and Midoriya with a twisted look of distress. He carefully smooths his hand through the now dry, green curls resting on Shuta's collarbone. It's such an openly tender moment that Shuta's surprised he was able to be present for it. The look clears as soon as he meets Shuta's gaze, turning as reserved as ever. He goes and sits in the armchair that Shoyuta had previously occupied. Aiza, what happened out there? Shoyuta sighs. How much do you want to know? Everything! He does tell All Might everything. And it's strange, but the words come easy. Every time he gets stuck explaining a tough spot of what they went through in the blizzard. He glances at the older man and suddenly feels calmer looking into piercing blue eyes. This was the symbol of peace for several years, after all, so it shouldn't be surprising, his natural aura of calm. He tells him of getting a phone call from Mike, and immediately running into the snow to find his kids. How he found them, some of them having been wounded, including Hisashi, but was still missing Midoriya. He tells him about how their fight with the villain went, in particular, an unusual dramatic flair, simply for the fact that the fight pissed him off. Then the ice breaking, Midoriya falling through. How he pulled both the villain and Midoriya out.